Good morning. Welcome to Health and Human Services. We are so delighted to have you here for our inaugural Food is Medicine Summit. My name is Jess Smith, and I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Intergovernmental and External Affairs, or IEA, here at HHS. And at IEA, we consider ourselves the front door of the department, so we're so glad that you walked into our front door this morning. We have a lot of people here today. This is probably our largest summit yet, and so we were joking yesterday, we hope that we have enough food here at our food summit to accommodate all of you today. I'm the mom of a very selective eater, and I know that I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to ensure that my kids are getting proper nutrients to be alert and active students during the day, and more generally, vibrant, healthy, productive people. I also think about kids and families and individuals across the country for whom food and healthy nutritional options are often out of reach. And so I couldn't be more thrilled about this convening and truly humbled by the extraordinary speaker lineup that we have here today. And again, a big thanks to all of you for showing up and being part of this great event today. A few housekeeping items before we begin with our amazing first panel. First, I know we have a lot of folks here in our great hall. There are a number of people that are still waiting to get in, and I want to just remind you that we have an overflow room right over here. We have an auditorium. Also, if you go into our East room, we have a TV set up so you can watch from there as well. We have coffee, tea, and water in our East wing, so please help yourself. This summit is being aired live on HHS.gov/live. So if at any point you want to invite your friends and family to join us, please have them join our conversation there online. This conversation is on the record. We have ushers by the registration table that will help direct you to the bathrooms if you haven't found them already. And if you feel so moved, please take photos while you're here today. We also have a wall over there that says Food is Medicine as a backdrop. So we invite you to take pictures and post them on social media with the hashtag HHS Food is Medicine Summit. So please do that with us today. Before we begin, I just want to say a sincere thank you to our whole team. There were a number of people that were behind making this summit possible today. Our OASH team, Rachel Fisher and Aaron McDonald. My IEA team of Diamond Green, Zainab Jama, and the incomparable Karen Marks, who really was the brainchild behind this summit. Without them, none of this would have been possible. And lastly, I also want to thank Rose Sullivan, who has also shepherded this summit today. She is not only an organizer, but she will be our MC of today's event. So without further ado, thank you so much again for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Rose. Thanks, Rose.
Hi, thank you all so much. As Jess said, we are just thrilled to have you here with us at HHS today. Over the course of the day, we're looking forward to engaging with you on food as medicine. And we here at HHS know that nutrition impacts health, and we're excited to spend the day talking to you all about it. I was reminded this morning as I left, my son knew that I was coming here today, and he gave me a really good reminder of how food as medicine can impact us in different ways, and sent me off with a snack of an empanada. So it was a good reminder that food, even in construction paper form, comes with love and has a real healing power. So our goal for today is to hear from our speakers and reflect on how we can all support systems and build an ecosystem to support food as medicine. This summit is a big deal for HHS, but it's not the only action that we're taking. This is one component of a larger food as medicine initiative underway to unify and advance collective action that will result in key tools that can foster greater uptake and scaling, partnership with our federal and non-federal partners. One tool that we are especially excited to be sharing with you today is the first ever set of federal principles and framing language for food as medicine. The Secretary will talk about this more in a bit, but we believe that grounding ourselves in key principles like access, collaboration, and education will help drive greater focus, investment, and innovation to advance food as medicine. While today is an exciting start, we look forward to sharing and learning more with you in the months to come. It's my honor today to introduce the first keynote panel. On stage, we will have HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. I've spent some time with Secretary Becerra, and in every setting and conversation, he has made a point of always talking about how food is medicine, and we should be incentivizing prevention-focused systems to ensure we build strong children and generations to come. We're also grateful to welcome United States Department of Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. With oversight over 16 nutrition assistance programs at the USDA, the Secretary works tirelessly and is personally passionate about ensuring that everyone, at all demographic groups and life stages, experience food and nutrition security. We at HHS are grateful for his partnership and leadership. I'd also like to welcome National Endowment for the Arts Chair Maria Rosario Jackson. Dr. Jackson is a champion in elevating the critical intersection of food, identity, and social connection. And finally, we're thrilled to welcome Chef Sean Sherman. As a native Minnesotan, I'm especially excited to welcome Chef Sherman to HHS. He is a visionary James Beard Award-winning chef from Minneapolis, and I have friends home who can back that up. And he was recently named by Time as one of the 100 most influential people. We're grateful that he is taking the time today to share his perspective on the power and importance of nutrition. Thank you.
All right, Haumatakepe. Can I use this one? Is this okay? Use this one. All right. Hihani washte, wambli watakepe nichiape. My name is Sean Sherman. I come from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have a nonprofit that I'm an executive director of called NATIFS, which is an acronym North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, or NATIFS for short. I also have a restaurant in Minneapolis called Owamni. We're one of the first kind of fine dining Native American restaurants in the country. And our focus of this was really, for me, as a chef, I grew up on Pine Ridge Reservation, and we didn't really have a lot of access to healthy food growing up. We didn't have restaurants on Pine Ridge when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. We had one grocery store that serviced an area almost the size of Connecticut for our communities. And there was very little food access. So for me, growing up as a chef, I learned food from all over the world. And I could name hundreds of recipes from all over the place, especially from European recipes in French and Spanish, Italian, you name it. And then one day I just realized there was a complete absence of indigenous foods out there. There was no representation for Native American people. There were no Native American restaurants. Even in our state's capital, where would we go out for Native American food here, right? And so so part of my work became understanding what were indigenous foods, what were my Lakota ancestral foods that we were utilizing, and what happened to them, and why were they removed from us? So I started doing a lot of study and trying to understand what my ancestors were eating, how they were processing foods, preserving foods, utilizing our food systems, and understanding, again, a big piece of it became what happened to us in American history as a lot of violence happened against indigenous peoples. And so today our work was really kind of showcasing what's possible with modern indigenous foods. And our focus was by showcasing indigenous foods, we basically removed colonial influences. So we took away foods that weren't from North America to showcase what was true North American foods, true indigenous foods. So our study took us removing dairy, wheat flour, cane sugar, beef, pork, chicken, all these things that were introduced to us, and created a very unhealthy diet for us. And so myself, I grew up with commodity food program on Pine Ridge Reservation, and it was a lot of canned foods. It was a lot of canned vegetables packed in high sodium, a lot of canned fruits packed in high corn syrups, literally having gallons of corn syrup at our table and a lot of powdered milk. And we were grateful to have food, but the bigger issue was that our indigenous foods were completely off the table. They just weren't there. So it's really important for us to kind of reassess and to think about where we are right now, and to really think about who we're purchasing foods from, because we put a lot of intention into the work that we try to do of trying to create a path of showcasing that there's a lot of amazing indigenous food producers out there that we could bring up. So our restaurant in Minneapolis, we opened in July of 21, right in the middle of the pandemic, and right away we won the Best New Restaurant Award by the James Beard Foundation, which is huge because that was a national award. And we're doing something completely different because we're gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, soy-free, pork-free. We're kind of like what all these fad diets are trying to get to. We're utilizing a lot of wild foods. We're utilizing a lot of wild game. We're prioritizing purchasing from indigenous producers first and BIPOC community nearby us as much as we can. And we're pushing a ton of money because that one restaurant's doing $5.5 million per year and growing. And a huge chunk of that is food costs, and a huge chunk of that food cost is going directly into the pockets of indigenous food producers. So our main work with our nonprofit, which is Natives, we have a model in South Minneapolis called Indigenous Food Lab, where we have a native market space where our local community can come and purchase indigenous food products. And we have over 50 indigenous food producers that we showcase there. We have a classroom digital studio that we're doing a lot of video work. We're making a lot of videos. We've been working with the USDA. We've been pumping out a lot of videos to showcase regional aspects of cuisine. And we're working with small school systems around, like on my reservation, Pine Ridge, where I grew up. We're working with Red Cloud School, helping them to develop healthy food for their school, giving them recipes, giving them the tools they need. We even gave them a whole bunch of kitchen equipment because their kitchen hadn't been updated since the 70s when I visited there 2 summers ago. And we're helping them to have the capacity to do that. But we're building a toolkit so we can do this in schools, universities, hospitals, penitentiaries, anywhere where there's kind of more institutional style culinary. We're trying to build that system too because those recipes require much lower costs, but we're still trying to attach some indigenous food producers so we're not just supporting the big food producers that are out there. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of nutrition. And for us, when I was growing up, if we look at statistics on some place like Pine Ridge, they're not great. There's a lot of type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of obesity. There's a lot of heart disease. And there's a lot of, so many things that we're literally feeding ourselves, but that's because of the food access that we have. So a lot of our work that we're doing with Indigenous Food Lab is trying to create that access. We're trying to push it out there. So we're creating paths to be able to distribute this food, but on top of that, we have to have the education to do it too, because it's one thing, I can hand somebody a bag of dried corn, but if they don't know what to do with it, it's not going to do them any good. So we need to evaluate what we're doing with our education when it comes to foodways. We need to understand the importance of culturally relevant foodways that are out there. We have to address what's been normalized for us through colonialism and through colonial history and really understand how we can start to reconnect and look at the world completely differently. Because it's the one thing that I like to compare when we utilize terms like decolonize, and we're not trying to pretend colonization didn't happen because that's not reality. What we're trying to do is showcase the values that colonization normalized in our lives, which was seeing a rampant destruction of the environment, a rampant overuse of water and abuse of waterways, rampant just focus on individuality and less on community, and just really highlighting capitalism in general and making somebody very rich at the top while so many people have to work very hard and don't get even food access when it comes down to it. Then we compare a lot of those values with how indigenous communities on not just here in North America, but really on a global scale have been deeply connected to the land spaces around them, how culture is extremely important, how we can really highlight and showcase community and showcase our foods, create connections to our ancestry no matter how shattered they might be because of colonial histories, and start to really understand how we can normalize something moving forward. And this work isn't really about changing what we're doing right now at this moment, because it's going to be really hard for us to change our diets right now, But what we can do is start to normalize these diets for the next generation, for the next group of kids. You have to catch them early, So we have to put these foods out there. We have to showcase the importance of it. And we're just in a really weird history time piece where it's really hard, especially as Black and Indigenous in America, because a lot of our histories are being removed from a lot of our curriculums right now. And that's a really dangerous situation. We should really be focusing on everything that happened to us and understanding that pain is a part of us, of all these things that happened to our direct ancestors, and that we have to build a path for them to understand those wrongs that happened in the past so we can start to take the steps to right them in the future. And everything that we do is trying to showcase what's possible. So our goal is to recreate what we've created in Minnesota, which is the Indigenous Food Lab with the market space, the classroom, a production kitchen, and a satellite restaurant, which is a part of our nonprofit family, because restaurants don't create food relief or food access, but restaurants do create an immense amount of jobs, because we have 100 employees at that one restaurant in Minneapolis in the middle of winter. And we're, again, just pushing tons of food product through there, so tens of thousands of dollars are going directly to food producers, and then it becomes a really strong voice for everything that we do, because people love to go to restaurants, and we just have to think differently about how we're utilizing restaurants and food spaces. So this year we're already moving into the Montana region. We're working with Montana State University, and we're going to be setting up all of those models right there and becoming a regional center point for that region. Right behind that, we're working with groups in Anchorage, Alaska to do that same thing. And eventually, after we get a couple of these models stamped out, we're going to be able to move them all over the nation. And it's really going to help push foods around. It's going to create distribution points. It's going to help normalize seeing healthy indigenous foods out there. And we're just going to showcase a whole different model of what's possible and be really intentional about who we're purchasing from. And it's great that, there have been more indigenous foods coming into the USDA program. But when I started my company, which was called the Sioux Chef, which was a play on words because it's SIOUX, back in 2014, I was able to buy wild rice in Minnesota for about $3 to $5 a pound wholesale, depending on who I purchased it from. And I saw elders purchasing it for like as low as $2 a pound in their own community. And when they brought wild rice into the commodity food program, it tapped out the demand was too high, so it tapped out the whole area. So White Earth Reservation bought used all their rice and brought all the rice around them, and it raised the price to, today I'm lucky to get it at $15 a pound wholesale, and I've seen elder prices up to $12. So it boosted those prices up way too high for our own community. And so we have to think more regionally, because not all indigenous peoples are the same. It's about diversity and understanding and appreciating that. So we have to break up our whole country into different regions and really focus on helping create more producers out there and giving them steps to build up to some of those capacities, and not just creating a demand that can't be reached except for a very few. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation, because food is medicine, and that's something that all indigenous peoples understand. And we have to really think about what we're putting into our bodies and what we're pushing out there and what we're normalizing for our next generation. Good? All right, so I've got a couple of questions here for you guys, and I guess you guys know who's going to take these questions. Okay. But it's really about what informs your passion or engagement on this issue as food as medicine.
Dr. Jackson, why don't we start?
Well, thank you for that talk. That was inspiring.
10 minutes.
That was inspiring. So I'm here representing the National Endowment for the Arts, and somebody might say, well, why does the arts have a place on this panel? And one of the things that I've been advancing in this position is the idea that everyone should have artful lives, that people should have access to exercise their creativity, to tell their stories on their own terms, that this is part of our American ethos. And I think that if you think about food and nourishment in a comprehensive way, it is not only about the material things that we are eating, which are so important, but it is about our relationship to the planet. It is about the way in which we prepare the food. It's how we consume it and with whom, the ritual that comes with food. And for me, all of that creates an opportunity for an expression of creativity, for the ability to tell story. And we know that this is those kinds of outlets, whether one is being creative independently or collectively, we know more and more that they are tied to our health. So there is a very interesting bridge, I think, that includes food, that has to do with understanding how creativity and community connects to health. Yesterday, we had an event at the National Endowment for the Arts, and actually Secretary Becerra and I announced the creation of a working group which is focused on arts, health, and civic infrastructure, trying to create those bridges to understand where is the connection between community creativity and our well-being. So food shows up a lot. Personally, growing up as a African-American and Mexican kid, my parents relied on food to help us understand our stories, where we came from, and what was important. So for me, it's a very natural part of how we think about artful lives in a healthy place.
You know, this is an interesting panel because I think we all bring a different point of view. My point of view is, I think, somewhat couched by the fact that I lost my parents at a relatively very early age from disease, which no doubt probably was indeed related to environmental and food issues. So there's a personal reason for being engaged in this. I think there's also a recognition that as we learn more about the science behind food and its capacity to, in fact, be medicine, we can indeed reduce the risk of chronic disease in this country, which obviously will have an impact on the individuals who will lead healthier lives. It will also have an impact on our capacity to fund other aspects of our economy. We spend a great deal, as Secretary Becerra well knows, of government funding and, frankly, of our own individual finances on healthcare and healthcare insurance. To the extent that we can be a better consumer, if you will, reducing the risk of chronic disease, we can also, I think, free up resources that can then go into building a healthier and stronger country and world. So there's that issue. I obviously bring the point of view as the Secretary of Agriculture, and Chef, I will tell you that there is a lot going on in the countryside, a lot going on that's positive, that's consistent with the message that you delivered. And I hope no one leaves here with the belief that American farmers and ranchers aren't sensitive to the need for sustainable practices, because my experience from my point of view is that they are indeed recognizing that and embracing it. And at USDA, we're making a concerted effort to be sensitive to a variety of points of view when it comes to food. And that's why the nutrition programs that we operate are really focused on trying to create healthier choices, trying to create those young children having that first opportunity to experience fruits and vegetables and healthy foods, making sure that our Congress, for example, fully funds the WIC program, because that is a program that introduces a lot of youngsters. We're also, I think, sensitive to the need for us to adjust our programs so that they are culturally sensitive, that there are different needs and different diets and different food needs as a result. And we're making the adjustment, and we're making the commitment to making sure that our food programs, whether it's the SNAP program or whether it's the school meal program, are in fact recognizing the different needs of people that we serve. And then finally, this may come as a surprise, but I think the discussion of food as medicine is a really good opportunity for us to begin a shift in this country away from a production model of agriculture where the focus has been, because the country has asked farmers to produce more, to a focus that now that recognizes that so many small and mid-sized producers need different sources of income and different streams of income in order to survive, in order to thrive. We've lost 437,000 farms in the last 40 years in this country. We've lost 141 million acres of farmland that was at one point in time farmed, but now is no longer available to farm. And I think we need to start asking the question of the country whether we're okay with that, whether we're okay with the societal price that we pay when we reduce rural communities and small town opportunities. This food as medicine creates a new opportunity. It creates a new revenue stream. It creates a new value-added opportunity. It creates an incentive for a diversification of crop production, which I believe can lead to small and mid-sized producers being more profitable. So, Secretary, there are a lot of reasons for doing this. I know that your world would be a lot simpler and easier if we were all healthier eaters, because you wouldn't have as much challenge for your Medicaid and Medicare budgets. But the reality is that there's a tremendous capacity here. And I wish change could happen overnight, but it doesn't. Maybe the recognition of change happens overnight. But I think we're taking the steps forward. I think we've begun this journey. And the question is whether we as a country will continue it and accelerate it.
Well, I have to start by first saying thank you to each and every one of the panelists who are here, because it is phenomenal to have an opportunity to talk about this. But I have to say, wow, to the crowd that's here, and I know there are folks who are joining us virtually. I should tell my team, if we can find some more chairs, we've got folks who are still standing, and there are very few seats that are empty, so maybe we can accommodate folks who are still standing. I think you all misread the title of our summit here. We didn't say food and medicine, it's food is medicine, and some of you are probably waiting for the breakfast to be served, I think, but I'm glad you're here. I have to say, Sean, and maybe I don't speak for everyone here, but I know for me, when I grow up, I hope I could be just like you, because I think you put in 10 minutes what all of us are here for. And I hope that we're all game and ready. And for me, this started very young because my family could not afford to just have us go visit a dentist or a doctor whenever it was time to do so. And so we had to be very preventative. My mom would always say to me, "Mijo, my son, es mejor prevenir que remediar." It is much better to prevent than to remediate. And, you know, when you're a kid, yeah, okay, Mom, I'm going outside to play. And you don't think about it too much. But as years go by, you think more and more about it. Then I got a little bit more into it, and I realized great leaders in this country have been talking about this for a long time. Frederick Douglass, back in the 1950s, I think he said it, 1850s, excuse me, said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." We're in the business of repairing broken men and women in this country instead of building strong children from the start. And food is medicine is just another way of saying we're going to prevent, not remediate. It is recognizing that we want to build these children strong from the get-go. And so this is important. We're glad you're here. It should be a passion. And if we get crowds like this every time we do an event, we're doing. In fact, Dr. Jackson and I did an event not long ago called Music is Medicine, because not everything gets cured with a pill. And I bet we could have far more success early on, in fact, probably avoid the pill, if we just did more music, more art, and certainly more of the things that Sean is doing to keep us in healthy mind, body, and spirit. So glad to see everyone here. Glad you all have that passion. And let's just remember, Frederick Douglass said it so well, it's all about the kids.
All right, next topic is nourishment. So when we think about and talk about food as medicine and the importance of nourishment, help us understand your perspective on the qualities of what we need to understand and how we address nourishment.
Tom, you and I can start. So we give Dr. Jackson a couple minutes to think. I can go if you want to go, or you want to go ahead. So I'll just say this. From our perspective, nourishment, we know that we've got to get away at HHS from thinking of healthcare as what happens between the walls of a doctor's office or in a hospital. And so we don't want to be constricted, and we don't want our dollars to be constricted to just paying for, through Medicaid, Medicare, ACA, for a visit to the doctor or a stay in the hospital. And so we're expanding the definition of a health dollar. If you're a school, we love you to apply to become a health provider so we can send you Medicaid dollars directly, not that so you don't have to worry about going to your health authority in your county or your state to ask for dollars to help your kids in your school, whom you see 5 days out of the week, stay healthy. We would love to help keep a nurse in every school every day, not just once every 3 weeks. We would love to make sure our kids are getting the behavioral health services they need. We're better than in a school where they are all the time. And we would love that school to become a hub, not just for education, but for health, for social good, and make use of it so we get the parents, especially in communities that have always been left behind, because it becomes easy for a parent to go to the local school. It's a lot tougher, especially if they don't have cars, to get to some location far away, which would be great to do. But if you're working 2 jobs, or if you've got kids to care for, you don't have enough money, it's got to be near your home. And so we want this to become a habit. And what better than to have some of our healthcare dollars help with education, housing, because keeping folks housed and not homeless means their health is probably in better shape. Keeping people educated means they probably know what to eat, which means they'll stay healthier. We save money if we can keep people healthy, and if we can invest in those institutions that keep people healthy, especially our kids, we can prove to anyone who wants to sue us for going outside those walls that we have created a healthier America.
You know, very few people understand the reach of the Department of Agriculture. The Secretary just mentioned housing, just mentioned food. Well, obviously, we have the nutrition assistance programs, but we also provide single-family housing loans. We also provide multiple family housing assistance. We help to create and fund schools and build schools. We help to fund and create mental health centers in communities. So there's an awful lot of opportunity to link to USDA. When I think of nourishment, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is better understand the science of all of this. And so we funded recently a virtual center at Southern University down in Louisiana to give us a better understanding of the science of precision nutrition. How can you really understand precisely how to target that nutrition in a way that will generate the most significant benefit, with an understanding that we would start with an equity focus, understanding and appreciating the diets of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, et cetera, so that we would then be able to incorporate that information, that science, in decisions that we make relative to a WIC program, a school meal program, a SNAP program, a child care or senior care feeding program. So that science becomes important. It also, I think, becomes important for us to look for ways in which we can better educate consumers. And so our SNAP education and training program, I think, is an opportunity for us to work collaboratively with states to encourage them to do with us a better job of educating SNAP beneficiaries of how to utilize that dollar in a way that is supportive of nourishing and also recognizes the financial challenges that these families face. I think it's also important for us to create incentives. We have a program called GusNIP. It's named after Gus Schumacher, who understood the importance of saying to families that were financially struggling, what if we helped you stretch that food dollar by saying that if you purchase this item, a fruit, a vegetable, we'll double the impact of your SNAP dollar. We'll give you an extra dollar to be able to make it so that you can afford. And then finally, I think it's important for us, you mentioned cost. It's important for us to increase the supply. And that means sending a message to American agriculture of the importance of diversification of crop production and figuring out creative ways to help farmers and ranchers diversify, help them extend their growing season so that there is a greater supply. And that's why you're seeing the USDA engaged in a variety of programs to help small and mid-sized producers diversify. You're seeing us invest in climate-smart commodities, which are sustainably produced commodities, encouraging farmers by providing them the resources to embrace conservation practices and then providing a value-added opportunity for them at the end of it. It's also why we're focused on creating a stronger local and regional food system. You mentioned indigenous foods. We are investing in indigenous food processing. That expands capacity, that expands supply. We are expanding significantly overall processing so that it's not just 2 or 3 packing plants that control what we have and what we process and what we eat, but it's a local system that enables the farm and the school to work collaboratively together. So all of that is, you're seeing significant investment as a result of the rescue plan and the Inflation Reduction Act. It allows us to do some things that we've not been able to do before. So if you build awareness, you build incentives, you build the knowledge base, and you send the right signals to American agriculture, you're going to see expansion of supply, expansion of use of fruits and vegetables with the knowledge that it's going to address and hopefully reduce chronic diseases.
When I think of nourishment, I think of a conversation that we had yesterday at the event I mentioned earlier. And the Surgeon General was talking about he was talking about loneliness, and he was talking about the ways to combat loneliness and how that was a health issue. And he was also talking about how we need to understand health not only as physical, but mental and spiritual. And so when I think of how to interpret nourishment with that as a context, it makes me think about what we can do with food alongside the provision of more equitable ways of distributing nutritious food. What else comes with that? Can we teach our children about what happens as you prepare it? The community that is built when you're cooking together, the creativity that's exercised when that happens. Can we talk about what happens when we hopefully sit to eat it together and we are in the company of family or friends or colleagues? That this is all part of how we have to think of nourishment, that it isn't, it's not just the material thing that goes in your mouth or the isolated thing that gets grown and processed, but that there is something very human and creative and communal that has to comprise our notion of nourishment as we think of health in a more holistic way.
Absolutely. And I would just add, too, that I always tell people to remember that what we eat affects us who we are, because our brains are attached to our bodies, and what we put into our bodies directly affects our mental state. And that's why it's really important to get the healthy food, especially to the younger generation. Last question is, we don't often get this kind of situation where we have three very powerful leaders sitting up here and we're all focused on one thing, which is this food is medicine. So tell us more about why you are here and why it is important to be working together.
If I can just say, I think the answer is inherent in the last thing I said, which is thinking more holistically about nourishment. And how it connects to community, to creativity, and ultimately our comprehensive health. And if we don't find ways to work beyond our silos, we're stuck.
You ask a question that requires a personal answer. My experience of life was much different than the folks on this stage. But what makes me potentially unique on this stage is the fact that I started out life in an orphanage. And one thing I know about my early life is that I was well fed at that orphanage, because I was very plump when I was adopted. But I've struggled with my weight all my life and with body image issues. I don't have much memory of my first couple of years in school, but I do remember being made fun of by my teacher because I was unable to do a math problem that she suggested it had something to do with the fact that I was fat. When you've had experiences like that, you understand and appreciate obesity in a completely different and personal context. And you understand the emotional toll that obesity can take, not just the cost and the chronic diseases and all of that. It's tough growing up in a situation like that. And if you're in a position of power or authority, then you have a responsibility and obligation to do what you can to make sure that as you're making decisions and as you're advancing policies, that you remember that kid in fourth grade. Because there are kids out there today that are going through the same experience. And fortunately for me, I had a lot of folks who would be supportive, but maybe today in this world where community is not as prevalent as it needs to be, that kid becomes isolated and some really serious consequences can occur. So for me, what we do at USDA, I always remember that kid because that's why it's important for us to do what we're doing, for example, in encouraging all states to participate in a summer feeding program and to do so in a way that provides nourishment. It's hard for me to understand, Secretary Becerra, why 15 states in this country wouldn't participate in a summer feeding program. So we have work to do if we're going to make sure that every kid, as you point out, has a real opportunity to grow healthy and happy.
And I'll simply say that COVID taught us a lot, what a difference a pandemic makes, right? We now can treat you so you won't die if we treat you. And that medication is now, President Biden made it possible for us to make it available to everyone. It's not commercializing. So now you have to get it through your insurance. If you don't have insurance, you got to pay more. Actually, we are providing, up until the end of this year, Paxlovid, making sure no one has to pay because President Biden was willing to commit several hundreds of millions of dollars to make that happen. But after that, and it's commercialized, insurance or you're on your own. That medication right now, I think, is being priced at about over $1,500 a treatment. That's $1,500 that Americans are not having to pay right now out of pocket. Or you can get vaccinated, which costs a fraction of that cost and probably prevents you from having to use Paxlovid to help keep you out of the hospital or save your life. We continue to treat illness rather than promote wellness. I don't know how much time we're going to have to do these things, but as long as I'm secretary at HHS, we're going to promote wellness so we don't have to worry about treating illness. That's going to require everyone's passion. And thank God we got a secretary at Ag who wants to push the envelope. Thank God we've got a director at NEA who wants to push the envelope. We are trying to move away from just thinking that a pill cures everything. And I think Sean said it best, that we know the formula. It was there. Our ancestors did it. We just got to go back to doing things the old way, the easier way, and quite honestly, the more successful way. So that's what we're trying to promote, and we're pleased that all of you are here.
Thank you, Chef Sherman, Dr. Jackson, Secretary Vilsack, for your inspiring words. We're now going to hear some announcements and some comments from Secretary Becerra, but I also want to welcome our new panelists to the stage to talk a little bit about the partnership. But please, a round of applause for the Secretary. We're now welcoming to the stage Elizabeth Yee, Executive Vice President of Programs from the Rockefeller Foundation, Danny Dudek, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer from Instacart, and Vince Hall, Chief Government Affairs Officer from Feeding America.
Okay, we got to keep this rolling, keep it on time. So can I simply say this? Where are we going to go from here? How do we move this? How do we not just come together for a summit and then go back and feel like we got too many things in our lives to really push this? I always tell my team here, never do mild when you have a chance to do something in a space that very few will ever get to be. And so please, let's not do mild. We are fortunate to have partners who want to take this to the next level. And we have established some principles about how we're going to do this together. They're going to speak to you about that. I won't steal their thunder. I simply will say this. This is a great partnership. There's money behind this partnership. It's real. We're going to do stuff. It is great to bring out a crowd like this. But there are kids today who are not eating well. There are kids today who are getting their food from a convenience store. Frederick Douglass is talking to you. My mom is in Spanish, but she's talking to you. Please, harness this moment. It is great to see how many people have an interest in this. But do it as my mom and dad taught me. Do it with ganas. Ganas. Don't look it up. I'm telling you right now what it means. It means more than desire, which is what you'll find in the dictionary. It means guts, grit, and game all in one. If we do this with ganas, wow. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Elizabeth to give some opening comments from the Rockefeller Foundation, and then Danny and Vince Hall after her. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's so great to see such a crowded room on this important topic. And Secretary Becerra, thank you so much for your leadership on such a crucial topic. The foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, has been around for 110 years. And when we were created by John D. Rockefeller, it was really focused on this idea of the well-being of humanity. And one of the challenges that we see in this space is the fact that food is not being reached, and nutrition is a core part of how we as a community really access opportunity. And so the challenge to us when Devin Clattel and Dana Thomas on our food team came to talk about this, the idea of the fact that the U.S. has the lowest life expectancy in the world, and yet we spend the highest per capita on healthcare outcomes, means we're really, really good at buying health services and absolutely terrible at purchasing health outcomes. And that is a dichotomy that affects the well-being of humanity that we as a foundation are really focused on changing. It should not be the case that your zip code determines where you can actually get health and opportunity. And so that's why today we feel that the power of FIM and what we can achieve in this room today is huge. And that is why we as a foundation have committed to a total of $100 million focused on food as medicine to ensure that we work with everyone in this room and around the country to change those outcomes. That's why we're working with Secretary Becerra and HHS to ensure that we provide and support our communities to get the education, the nutrition, that we advocate for the changes that need to happen. As a foundation, we actually started this journey in 2019, right before the pandemic, and trying to understand how we can work with health payers to achieve those outcomes. And then we started partnering with the American Heart Association to then invest more deeply into actually building out the science and evidence base. And so I sit before you here today to say we're on the next frontier of what we are trying to do. Excited to partner with Feeding America, with Instacart, to actually take those dollars and not just commit to money, but to take it to action and to really help improve lives with communities and to work with HHS to achieve that outcome. So I wanted to thank you, Secretary Becerra, to all of the people in this room for your leadership. Through our work together as a community, I believe we can change nutrition outcomes for America, we can change landscapes and opportunity for people in this country and build a more equitable place. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Secretary Becerra, for your leadership and for the HHS team for bringing together such an important group. I'm Danny Dudek. I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Instacart. I'm so proud to share the stage with our friends and partners at Feeding America and Rockefeller. I thought I would just share a minute today on how we're pursuing this work. Many of you know Instacart as the leading grocery technology platform in North America. Because we have 1,400 grocers and retailers that sit across the marketplace, we can deliver and access 95% of all U.S. households with fresh food, not from a convenience store, with fresh food in 2 hours. And maybe more importantly for this room, we can get to 93% of all U.S. food desert residents with fresh food in 2 hours, which is pretty amazing. We know that health starts in the home, and maybe more literally around the kitchen table. And for us, we've, for the last decade, been at this cross-section of where food and family meet. And as a result, people's health. Last year, we launched Instacart Health, and we did that to support the administration's national strategy on hunger, nutrition, and health, because we wanted to unlock our products, our platforms, and our partnerships in order to bring more nutritious food into the home, which is just so important. Actually, this work for us started with SNAP. It started with Secretary Vilsack. It started with the team at the USDA. This week, we became the largest e-commerce platform to bring SNAP and offered as a method of payment for families all over the country. We're now live with SNAP in Kroger stores, Albertson stores, and all Costco stores, which is absolutely amazing. When we think about this work, we think about making sure that people have the scale, which is about cross-partnership and collaboration, making sure that people understand how, when we work together, what's possible. Now, today, imagine a patient leaving the hospital. That patient comes home and they find bags of personalized groceries on their front door. And those groceries, that's medically tailored groceries prescribed by their physician, covered by their insurance, and also delivered by Instacart. That is a magical loop that was never possible before. But now with our technology, when we think about what's possible, we can connect the dots all behind the scenes and work together in really unique ways. The next piece that keeps us up at night as we think about this work is how to make sure families have choice and selection in the programs that are out there. So many of these food as medicine programs can feel cold and clinical, but how do we actually remember the cultural familiarity and the selection that's so important? We just did a community health program with Good Measures, and Good Measures works with patients and their insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, to actually get medically tailored groceries into the home. But importantly, the families are choosing, and it's cultural familiarity that really makes a big difference here. The study for the year of work just came back today. We're going to share some of this data. The study found that 70% of program participants that were given the medically tailored groceries had blood pressure that decreased or maintained, which is amazing. The second piece of it, where we saw our stage 2 hypertension patients, those patients had double-digit reductions in blood pressure, which is just incredible to see. So when we think about the scale and the interventions and the collaboration that's connecting the dots behind the scenes, we see it really come to life in neighborhoods and through our community health programs that we're doing all over the country. So we're excited about this partnership. We're proud to represent the private sector and just look forward to the months and years ahead of work together. Thank you so much.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for bringing us all together here today. It is a powerful starting point for a bold new initiative. And thank you to Secretary Vilsack and the team at USDA for the incredible partnership that they bring and have brought to solving hunger across the United States for decades. My name is Vince Hall. I'm the Chief Government Relations Officer for Feeding America. Feeding America, for those who don't know, is a national network of 200 partner food banks who are then partnered with over 60,000 faith-based and nonprofit organizations to solve hunger. The scale of hunger in the United States is staggering. About 1 out of every 7 people in our country, according to USDA, is struggling with food insecurity, which is a way of saying lacking consistent access to nutritious food. The rate is higher amongst kids. It's 1 in 5 children in our country struggling with food insecurity. But Feeding America food banks are rising to that challenge, having distributed over 5.3 billion meals worth of food last year. And the notions that you might have about what food banks are distributing might not be accurate, because over 3 billion pounds of food was healthy, fresh proteins and produce and dairy products. Food banks have become engines of nutrition in their communities. And the entrepreneurship and the localized, culturally sensitive and person-centered, neighbor-centered services that food banks are providing are radically different than what was being done even 15 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's an exciting journey that we find ourselves on. What we do know is that hunger impacts health in very significant and fundamental ways. We know that healthcare costs go up. We know people find it much harder to recover from trauma or disease or illness when they're struggling with food insecurity. We know that investing in nutrition is an investment in human health and quality of life. So Feeding America food banks are fully committed to this work, Mr. Secretary. Over 80% of our food banks already have food as medicine partnerships. As an example, Elevance Health Foundation has a deep commitment to partnership with Feeding America, and in just the last 9 months, 153,000 people in their healthcare system have been screened and identified for food insecurity. 30,000 of them have been referred to local food banks for solving that food insecurity challenge, and 25,000 of them have joined a food as medicine program so that there's continual partnership and monitoring. My own experience included being CEO of Feeding San Diego, and what I found is that San Diegans really robustly appreciated these partnerships. We were able to put food distribution centers in hospitals so that people who were diagnosed with food insecurity could leave with food resources. We were then able to give them through a 211 system, 30, 60, and 90-day check-ins to make sure that they were accessing local food resources. We were able to bring food products to type 2 diabetes education programs so that people not just theoretically learned how to treat that disease, but had practical tools to do so. So these partnerships are deep and robust and are happening all throughout the Feeding America network. I want to salute the Feeding America CEOs who are here. I see Radha from Capital Area Food Bank. I see Paco from Miami, who we're going to hear from later. All of these CEOs are brilliant entrepreneurs doing incredible work in the food as medicine space, and this new partnership with Health and Human Services is an incredible opportunity to catalyst those initiatives to even broader scale and impact. Thank you so much to Instacart for all your support and partnership, and thank you again, Mr. Secretary.
As the Secretary mentioned, partnerships are so important to accelerate and sustain the change, so we can't wait to work with each of you. Please, again, a round of applause and thanks to this panel. I know of interest to a number of you in the room today is how the Department of Health and Human Services is approaching food as medicine across our various agencies. So for the next session, the Department of HHS Collaboration and Investments in Food as Medicine, I'm so delighted to introduce and bring my colleagues from across the department to the stage to discuss their current activities and practices in the food as medicine space. Admiral Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health, who's leading this initiative, will lead the conversation and is joined by Tara Schwetz, the Deputy Director of the National Institute of Health, Aditi Malik, the Acting Director of the Office of Minority Health at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Andy Lipstein-Friestedt, the Deputy Director for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Rosalind So, the Director of the Indian Health Service, Rob Califf, Commissioner of the FDA, and Jordan Grossman, Deputy Administrator for the Health Resources and Services Administration. Over to you, Admiral Levine.
Well, thank you so much, Rose. And we are all just really pleased to be here for this incredible conference that we're having about food is medicine. And I'm so pleased to be joined by this amazing panel. In my role as the Assistant Secretary for Health, I really work every day to ensure that all people and all places in our nation have the opportunity to thrive. Food and nourishment are central to that effort. Nutrition is key to our physical, mental, social, and economic well-being, which is why I am just so excited to see strong commitments and so much tangible action around food as medicine from such a wide range of sectors and partners. And I'm very proud that my office is championing the current HHS Food as Medicine project to unify and advance collective action. And that is through my Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health and our Office of Disease Prevention, Health Promotion. I'm also proud to announce our new HHS Food is Medicine Framing Language and Principles. Under these principles, we all share an understanding that food is medicine. It recognizes that nourishment is essential to good health, well-being, and resilience. It facilitates easy access to healthy food across the health continuum in the community, cultivates understanding of the relationship between nutrition and health, unites partners with diverse assets to build sustained and integrated solutions, and invests in the capacity of under-resourced communities. I know how much the people living in this country stand to benefit from putting these principles into action. Secretary Becerra is always talking about putting things into action. And from everything we're here today to discuss as well. We're about to hear from leaders across HHS doing incredible work in food as medicine, and we're going to hear from them about what is currently working, what resources are available, and how to catalyze even more actionable actions. So, I'd like to start by inviting each of you to offer thoughts on the question, how are you and your agency supporting or advancing food as medicine opportunities in your agency? We'll start with Director So.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Rosalind So, the IHS Director. I'm also a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And what an important topic to talk about food as medicine. This, for me personally, as well as across Indian country, this resonates very much with us. This is not a new concept. This is something that we have embraced throughout all of the work that we do at the Indian Health Service, but also how it is deeply rooted into our traditional practices every single day and has been passed down from generation to generation, the value and the importance of food. And moreover, how we integrate that with everything that we do, with the whole person. It is not just an isolated activity that we do. It is embraced in many different levels. It's very sacred. And we also use this. It is medicine. It is medicine for us across Indian country. As I travel throughout Indian country, I'm seeing more and more of our tribal communities very much embracing this, taking this on as personal commitments to ensure that food is used as medicine and that we go back to those traditional practices, those traditional meanings that were brought to us long ago, and how important that was then and how important it is today. I'm also aligning with Pillar 2 of the White House National Strategies for Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. We are doing a number of things, taking this into action by making sure that we have integrated into our electronic health record, where we are working with each patient that comes into our healthcare facility and ask not only about food security, but other social determinants of health to better understand those areas that we need to be part of as we are addressing the health of our tribal communities. And to that, we're embracing this by making sure that we're taking additional steps to work with additional partners throughout the community to ensure that anyone that falls into this particular situation or this category that needs additional assistance with food, that is provided to them through prescriptions and so forth. There are many other things that IHS is doing to make sure that we continue to lift up Indian country by making sure we focus on that food is medicine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. I must say that in my trips to other states and American Indian Alaska Native tribes, I've certainly seen that, particularly when I went to Alaska, where there's such an emphasis and such challenges with their traditional foods, which, as you said, is medicine for them. Thank you. Andy.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Admiral Levine, and really a pleasure to be here with this fantastic panel with all of you on such an important topic this morning. So I want to talk about a few different ways that CDC is approaching this work. First, just talking about what a joy it is to think about public health as foundational to this. And so being here, thinking about what this work means for individuals who really need access, who are thinking about what food as medicine means, but also about the community-based public health approach to food as medicine. So actually, I'll start by talking a little bit about some work that we did with Tufts, with Harvard, with the Food as Medicine Coalition, to think about the framework for this work, the Food as Medicine Pyramid. And when we think about the different elements that we need in place to have a successful approach to food as medicine, adding a layer to that pyramid at the bottom, which is those community-based policy and program initiatives. And that supporting all of this work needs to be that public health approach so that our communities are ready to support this work across the spectrum, upstream, thinking about prevention throughout the sort of clinical care continuum. And when folks are out of clinical care and really need to be thinking about looking forward, how do I make sure that I have access to food in a way that is really recognizing that food as medicine framework. So we're really excited about that work and sort of the ability to really frame this up with a public health voice and a public health lens. We have a lot of work programmatically happening at the CDC. Actually, I see Ruth Peterson here, whose division is really driving this work at CDC, and there's so much that we're excited about. Our state physical and activity and nutrition program is investing in states across the country, doing work like making sure that we have farmers markets can be accepting federal nutrition assistance programs, that we have nutrition guidelines in places, including for places like food banks, thinking about fruit and vegetable voucher programs, and considering the real real importance of produce prescription programs and things like this really across the spectrum. And similarly, our high obesity prevention program, our REACH program that's thinking about communities of color and really reaching across ethnic and racial groups that really need this access. So really across that full set. One example, and you'll hear more about this later today, is the work that we're doing in Marion County. They're one of our grantees. We're really excited about the work that they're doing. Including to have a prescription produce program that is put in a produce prescription program that's been put in place 7 clinics across 3 FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, including a health system. They're doing that. They're wrapping that around with nutrition education work, with fruit and vegetable vouchers. So really important work we're seeing on the ground. The third thing I want to touch on quickly is data. CDC data is our bread and butter. We can't fix what we can't measure. And so actually, you'll hear from Jordan in a minute, but I'm maybe going to scoop him a little bit on some work that we've been doing in collaboration between CDC and HRSA. For the first time ever, the National Survey on Children's Health is looking at kids between 1 and 5 and asking questions that we haven't asked before. So we know now that in 40 states and DC, more than half of kids had a sugar-sweetened beverage last week. In 20 states, more than half of kids didn't have a daily vegetable in the last week before that survey. And so we're able to take those numbers and think about what's working. Are our programs working? Are our policies working? And where do we need to be making changes? The same for our behavioral risk factor surveillance survey at the state level, our NHANES work at the national level. So making sure that we have the data to really drive this work and make sure that we're getting results.
Thank you so much. Well, Jordan from HRSA.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. And it's a pleasure to be on this really important panel. And I have to say about that survey, the National Survey of Children's Health, I actually got surveyed this year. I have 2 small children, and I really felt like I won the lottery. I got it in the mail. I was so excited. I told everyone at work. So thank you so much for having me here. My name is Jordan Grossman. I'm the Deputy Administrator of the Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA. And at HRSA, really, our mission is to serve high-need communities. We like to say that we're an agency that really tries to operationalize health equity. And you can't really talk about health equity without the social determinants of health, and especially food. And so I just want to highlight a few of our programs that are doing this that we really feel like are foundational safety net programs. And again, we really feel like you can't operate those programs, you can't operate as a safety net in this country without thinking about food and how important it is for health. So the few things I want to highlight quickly off the top are our health center program, our maternal and child health work, and our Federal Office of Rural Health Policy. So in our health center program, as many folks may know, and Andy was just mentioning, we have 1,400 health centers at 15,000 sites across the country. And these are local patient-directed organizations that provide care regardless of a patient's ability to pay. And I'd say we take pride that they've been on the forefront of a lot of issues in terms of treating the whole person. And so I think that's something that a lot of health centers are not just about the clinic. The community is a key part of that. They sort of view themselves as a key part of community health. And they've been, so many of our health centers have implemented Food is Medicine initiatives from coast to coast. I know we have a health center in California that has an approach that's sort of from the front door to the clinic door to make sure that everyone along the way is treating food as important as other medicine. I know we have a health center in Delaware that also, especially coming out of the pandemic, saw as they were screening for food insecurity, saw this over and over again, and started a program to make sure that they were getting actual fresh food delivered to their patients. And again, it's just noting, and I think it's a theme of the day. I heard the secretary talking earlier about not sickness but wellness. It's focusing on, you're not going to be able to treat wellness if you don't go beyond the 4 walls of the clinic visit. Another program I really want to highlight is the Healthy Start program in our Maternal and Child Health Bureau, which is focused really on areas that have high rates of maternal and infant death. And these are also just fantastic community-based programs. And again, while they're focused on some of the clinical drivers of maternal and infant health, they also see that these other social determinants, and especially food and nutrition, are so important. And not only do they provide sort of counseling and many of those types of services, but many Healthy Start sites, I know our administrator was just at Baltimore Healthy Start, they have a food pantry on site. They have a connection right there. And a lot of our grantees are taking that approach to make sure that where we can, we're a one-stop shop. We're not just referring you out somewhere hoping that that connection is made, but we're really bringing it together. I think another factor on that maternal and child health, just very quickly, we have a training program with, I think we've trained 4,500 students across the country, 30,000 practitioners on maternal and child nutrition and health, making sure that next generation of providers in the area, in this area, have that training and really that integrated whole person approach. And the last program I want to highlight is in our rural communities. We're very much focused on rural and underserved communities, and we know we have some areas of the country where there are higher rates of risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, et cetera. And so I know we have a partnership in Arkansas, actually, where we're targeting direct assistance. It's called Healthy Food RX, to make sure it's targeting 1,000 seniors at higher risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Again, I think Andy mentioned we're talking about upstream at the clinical and beyond, and this is really trying to get folks and make sure we're preventing some of those outcomes, and again, recognizing that we're going to prevent them with access to healthy food and education about healthy food. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Aditi, can you give us CMS's perspective?
Yeah, happy to. And I'll just echo my thanks to be on this panel, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I'll start by saying what we heard the Secretary say and others say, the very deep connection between nutrition, health, and well-being, not just physical health, oral health, mental health, spiritual well-being. We, CMS, are responsible for overseeing the 3 M's, Medicaid and CHIP, Medicare, and the marketplaces that were established by the Affordable Care Act. $1 in $5 in health care, over 150 million people insured by CMS programs across the country. So from our vantage point, and it's so nice actually to hear about what other colleagues across HHS are doing. So I'll give you our slice of the pie, which is really focused, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. Our slice of the pie is really focused on 3 areas. Thank you for laughing at my dad joke. One is screening, right? So using healthcare encounters to really understand and assess, are people food insecure? Do they have an unstable housing situation? Do they have unstable transportation? Really, in recognition of what we know to be, as Jordan and others have alluded to, the broader social drivers of health that far more than clinical care drive downstream health outcomes. The second is in actually paying for services that address those needs, things like medically tailored meals, nutrition counseling, nutrition education. And then last but not least is partnerships and collaboration, which I really think is what today is all about. I'll give you a few examples. So in the Medicaid program, lots of recent flexibilities through managed care authorities and Section 1115 demonstrations. And I won't go into the weeds about what those are, but we now have upwards of 9 states, some of whom are in the room today, that are taking advantage of those flexibilities to screen high-risk individuals in the Medicaid program and deliver services. We also have recent guidance out on this, and you'll hear from my colleague, Dr. Jessica Lee, a bit more about that later today. In the Medicare program, you heard me talk about screening now across a number of care settings or practice settings, requirements for health-related social needs screening, inclusive of nutrition insecurity. And just in the most recently finalized Medicare physician fee schedule, new coding and payment to actually pay for those screening services and pay for connections to the great work that community-based organizations and social services organizations also represented here today do, things like connecting folks to a food pantry or connecting them to a care manager or case manager that can actually help a hungry child and their family access food. And then last but not least, I'll mention through the CMS Innovation Center, folks may be familiar with the Accountable Health Communities model that the Innovation Center launched many years ago. That model at its core was testing the idea of whether health-related social needs screening and care navigation could improve downstream health outcomes, where more and more evaluation data is coming out. But what I will share is of the needs that folks were screened for, food insecurity was the most common. 63% of people screened through that model were food insecure. What we also learned from that model is that screening alone and care navigation alone are insufficient, really, to meet those needs. So a number of models that have followed in the CMS innovation portfolio continue to screen, but now are really pushing more on things like risk-adjusted payments and the ability to actually pay for connection to services. So one such model that I'll highlight is the value-based insurance design model, or VBID, that allows Medicare Advantage plans to offer supplemental benefits like direct nutrition services to enrollees. And for 2024, we anticipate that over 7 million Medicare Advantage beneficiaries may be able to avail themselves of those supplemental benefits. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tara, could you give us the perspective about research in the NIH?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Tara Schwetz. I'm the NIH Deputy Director for Program Coordination, Planning, and Strategic Initiatives, and really excited and delighted to be here with all of you today. Talk a little bit about what NIH is doing in this area, and you kind of beat me to the punch there because I was going to say our bread and butter at NIH is really research. So, so we'll build on the pie. Our slice of the pie is to help support that evidence base to inform a lot of the development of some of the programs and efforts that you have. And so in supporting research, in supporting this evidence base, we have a portfolio in the food as medicine arena that is across 8 of our institutes and centers. We're funding 32 investigator-initiated programs in this space, looking at a variety of different topics and areas, focusing on things like social determinants of health, which was mentioned previously, helping to better understand cardiovascular disease, epigenetics and epigenomics, diabetes and food insecurity, and many other areas. And one of the examples of the programs I was going to mention today is something that we funded in 2023 that is looking at food insecurity and social determinants of health for those people who are at high risk for diabetes. So looking at the impact of medically tailored meals on their health outcomes and food insecurity, looking at things like their blood glucose levels, their A1C, and just other health-related quality of life indices. So it's actually in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. So my colleague Rob might be interested in that, but we're doing a lot of great work all across the country, and that's just one example of one of the projects we have. We also, in I think 2021, established the Office of Nutrition Research in our Office of the Director, and just recently, late last year, we appointed the first permanent director of that office, Dr. Drew Bremer, who's here in the middle of the room, and really excited about that appointment, and look forward to seeing the many things that he's going to be working on and helping to coordinate across our 27 different institutes and centers, including things that we're working on across HHS, and we have a collaboration that we partnered with 12 federal agencies to put out a request for information to really help us understand the research areas and gaps in this field. And we're partnering with OASH to help us think through the analysis and some of the next steps on that. So just a couple things, so I know we're tight on time, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rob Califf, FDA.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here. Sorry I was late. We were in a scintillating conversation about dealing with oversight committees in the Congress, and it was so much fun I couldn't tear myself away. But just to remind me and everyone else, the F in FDA does stand for food. I got reminded of that about a gazillion times this turn back around as FDA commissioner. But the D stands for drugs, and I'm going to throw in a little devices there too as it relates to the total problem. So food as medicine is something that really should come naturally to us. And I'll just stress a couple of key things. Number one on our list of urgent issues right now is getting more information, better information on the food packages themselves. There is an updated nutrition facts label that has added sugars as a requirement, but there's more to be done there. We're working hard on other areas like the voluntary sodium reduction, and we know with what was done with trans fat that this can have a big impact if we're able to get it done. We're working on the definition of the term healthy. Now, to a regular person, that seems like crazy. How could it take so much work? It's been a long time, but we're very enthusiastic and hope we'll get that across the finish line because taking into account things like sugar, sodium, saturated fats, and overall food groups, could end up with a situation where retailers and manufacturers would be incented to, in general, meet a given set of criteria that could change the underlying composition of the diet that people have. But I think many of you, I can tell by the nodding heads, are aware of the pitched combat that goes on in getting this done, with many vested interests in play. I'd also very much, I like to say I'm just a country doctor from South Carolina, although we lived in Durham, as you point out, right next to Raleigh. It seems like we ought to have the label on the front of the package. It just seems like such a straightforward thing. How could anyone be opposed to it? But there are a lot who are opposed. We're working hard on making that happen and also getting the right symbols on there. A symbol that signifies healthy. I'll talk more about this with the next question, but I learned in my time in Silicon Valley that you can educate as much as you want. Behavior is largely affected by symbols and messages that are not rational depictions of risk and benefit using numbers. And then finally, there's education. My colleagues have talked a lot about that. Amazingly to me, doctors are still listed by people as the most trusted source for nutritional information, which seems a little weird since medical education includes very little about nutrition. So we need to work on that, but also take advantage of the fact that the whole health system is moving to team-based care. And I'd also stress the importance of educating educators who spend so much time with our children and young adults. So I'll stop with that one and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much. So clearly there's a lot of work, an incredible amount of work and passion for food as medicine and opportunities. So we're going to shift our discussion, as you alluded to, Rob, to looking forward. So where do we go from here? As a federal department and as a nation, where do we go from here to develop robust food is medicine approaches? And Rob, goes back to you.
All right. Well,
we follow the script here. Right?
First, yeah. Thanks. First of all, we have to look at the overall situation. I love the enthusiasm and positivity of the group here, but if we look at what's happening in our country, I would argue we're not winning the battle. And so, despite all that we know, Americans are gaining weight, and we have this avalanche of chronic disease that we need to deal with. And so I think there is a need for better and more intensive data as a first requirement, and I would say this is an all of HHS effort and all of society effort to understand these issues better. And it couldn't be a better time to do this because of the changes in technology with digitization, the advent of artificial intelligence. We can look at complex issues like the constituents of the diet now and health outcomes over time in a way that we just couldn't do before. But it's also the case that we can't just sort of treat our way out of this. We've got to get to the basics that we just talked about in the last session. I mentioned a couple of things that relate to FDA specifically. We're doing a big proposed reorganization right now that will, by congressional intent, create a center for a center of excellence for nutrition that will include a specific component for one area of food as medicine. There are diseases that can be specifically treated, and that's going to be a focus, but also infant formula is a really critical part of this where there's a lot to be done. Since we're talking about food as medicine, I got to mention the interaction of the GLPs now with diet as a key issue across society that we've all got to deal with. I couldn't be more excited about the emerging data with GLPs. We have to always acknowledge that's a treatment for a problem that was created in the first place. But how to use drugs in combination with diet in the advent of this chronic disease is critical. We've got to understand ultra-processed food, and it's one of the more complex things I've ever dealt with. Drugs are easy. You know what the dose is that you're taking. Ultra-processed food is a complex combination of things that we've got to figure out. And when we talk about food, as it relates to FDA, there's gene editing and the environment, because we also have accountability for animals. And in our work with the Agriculture Department, how we deal with animals, how we deal with plants, and having a resilient supply of food that's nutritional is a really core fundamental issue that we deal with a lot at the FDA. So get better data, prioritize education, strengthen the policies, and then the last thing I'll mention that goes back to my comment about Silicon Valley, we know that what impacts people when they go to the grocery store, I'm not a very sophisticated consumer. I don't take time when I go to, study the label for everything. People are mostly impacted by the nudges that are affecting them in everyday life. And if all we do is present facts so people can make decisions, we're not going to win versus the sophisticated advertising that I learned a lot about, which plays on emotions and subliminal signals that cause people to be hungrier. And it may even be the case, as we're learning with ultra-processed food, that the more you eat, the more you want, which is a really interesting, just think about potato chips. Ever tried to eat one? We've got to understand the connection between what's in the food and what's in this gut-brain axis that the GLPs are now uncovering as a biological phenomenon. It's not just willpower. So it couldn't be a more exciting time scientifically. We've got to have the scientific basis, and then we got to follow through.
That's right. We have to get the scientific miracles to the people. Thank you. And so, Andy, can you give the perspective of the CDC?
Sure. Thanks so much. So just to add to that, I mean, I think so much of that is exactly right. And just to sort of put a period at the end of some of those sentences, we know what works, right? We know, I mean, across this stage, across this room, there is much more to know, but there is a lot that we know right now. And so I think, first and foremost, in terms of where do we go from here, I would say we really build on what we know, and we make sure that we're taking things to scale and that we're really optimizing the programs, the policies that we know sort of have that promise right now. We've talked a little bit this morning about the White House strategy on hunger, nutrition, and health. For us at CDC, we have 3 really important deliverables under that strategy. One is expanding the SPAN program, the State Physical Activity and Nutrition program that I talked about a little bit earlier. 2, thinking about food guidelines in federal facilities and how we can be expanding those. And 3 is around access to family healthy weight programs. So all 3 of these, right, we know it works. We know it matters. And so leaning in and making sure that we can really bring things to scale, deliver on that. We have the leadership from the very top right now. And so that is such an incredible gift to us all as we're trying to do this work. I also want to talk a little bit about, Aditi talked a bit about collaboration, and I think that is such an important part of how we succeed here. I spoke a little bit earlier about the collaboration that CDC is doing with states, with jurisdictions, with communities. You're hearing a lot this morning about the collaboration in the interagency, right? None of us can do our work on our own, and all of our work is more effective when we're linked together and doing that in a collaborative manner. We also, just to lean in again to pick up on a thread that we heard from Aditi on healthcare and public health, right? That we can't be thinking about these in separate ways, that we have community interventions happening over here, clinical interventions happening over here. We have to have those really together and woven as one approach to food as medicine. And then finally, well, we heard a little bit about Congress, but just to say one more word about Congress, which is that, we'll be hearing later today from bipartisan members of Congress that understand this work, that care about this work, and so really bringing policy makers at all levels to the table and collaborating there as well. I might just make one more point, which is about integration. And, for us at CDC, we're focused on 3 main areas as an agency this year. So not just thinking about food as medicine, but about all of our work. We've been thinking about supporting young families, about mental health, about readiness and response. And just to think about, okay, how do we think about food as medicine in each of those areas? Supporting young families, it couldn't be more obvious, right? To have successful, healthy young families, nutrition security, really good access to this kind of work is just absolutely foundational. We haven't talked a lot about mental health this morning, but we know that when we think about food as medicine, it's not just physical health, right? It's mental health, and it's that full package. So knowing that we're not going to be fully successful on realizing mental health without a really strong foundation there. And even on readiness and response, which might feel less obvious, we've all learned many times over the last few years about the linkages between chronic disease and between infectious disease. And so realizing that we cannot be prepared, we cannot be ready for whatever comes next without a well-fed, nutritionally supported country. So we have the momentum, and just making sure that we're making the most of it.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for highlighting the connection between nutrition and mental health. I think that that's not talked about enough, so thank you. Jordan, can you give us HRSA's perspective?
Thank you, and I think you're hearing a lot of commonality here. I think I just want to pick up on two things, one from Andy and one from Aditi, and I think it's around scale and it's around investment. I think, as Andy mentioned and others have mentioned, we know a lot of things that work, and I think here at HHS you're hearing, oh, we funded this piece, we funded that piece. I know a number of us who were here years ago also, we were focused quite a bit on reforming the delivery system, so we're not just focused on that 1 8-minute visit and just billing as many services as possible, but we've seen some of the success there, but it's not truly to scale yet, right? I mean, so many of us have probably visited the doctor and it still feels the way it's felt for a long time. And so we really, really need to scale the things that work, as Andy was saying. We have a lot of these things from our perspective at HRSA. That's a lot of things like the approaches I was talking about before in terms of the community-based work, whether it's a health center, whether it's investing in community health workers, whether it's investing in foundational maternal and child health work in our rural communities, and on and on and on. And so I'd say the second thing that ties very closely to that is investment. Aditi was talking about how we pay for things and how we make sure that we're incentivizing these things there. I would say like that collaboration piece is really important. Our health centers, they get more revenue from the Medicaid program than they get from us. And that's because that's a big part of the patient dynamics that they serve, but also that's a reflection of the collaboration we need here. And I think we always need to remember that the people we serve do not exist in the silos of each individual federal program. Right? That's just, no one goes to the doctor and is thinking, oh, well, this is for my Medicaid and this is HRSA and the FDA has regulated this device and so on and so forth. And so I think that's something that you can hear from this group. When we talk about collaboration, that's what we mean. We want to make that end user experience. We're talking about how consumers' behavior better, because that's going to drive better health. I feel like folks maybe have seen this article and sort of an article of faith now that patients are the uncompensated workforce in the healthcare system, and I think we're all trying to fix that. And then the last thing, just sort of on investment that I would note, and I think picking up on what Andy said, is we need investment to do our jobs and to scale these programs. We, in the president's budget, we've proposed to significantly increase funding in health centers and workforce programs, thousands and thousands of people across the country to go into underserved communities and serve. And it's not just money, right? Like I know that some of the members that Andy referenced that are coming today have a keen interest in syncing up, whether it's SNAP and WIC with health centers or all of these things, so it's one cohesive approach for folks. We can't do that, the government, without that type of investment, and that's something that this administration is fighting for. I think we mentioned before the White House blueprint, the White House strategy. You can see we have these solutions, but we really need, in the future, I think, to be successful, to scale them and make sure we secure the investment so that we can do that.
Thank you for emphasizing those points and the collaboration and the cooperation. Actually, now with my work in the federal government, I do think that this is a HRSA program, and that's the FDA, and they're regulating this. But most people don't. I understand that. So now we're going to look to the future and reflect on how we can collectively develop a strong future for food as medicine in those programs. So the next question is, what are the greatest opportunities that you are listening for during the summit? And what will enable those opportunities to actually come to fruition? And we're going to start with Aditi.
Thank you. So first part of the question around what am I listening for, and I'll pick up where Jordan left off. Seamless experiences, right? The idea of I go to, and a no wrong door, right? I would love if we waved a magic wand, closed our eyes, and we were sitting in this same room 4 years from now, 8 years from now, whatever it is, And we could say, and actually this stage was filled with people whose lives had been changed by well-integrated federal, social, and private sector programs, right? Or public sector, social sector, private sector programs, because we had figured out through technology, through trust, through real collaboration, to actually make it work for people. And that to me ought to be the North Star, and I think that's why all of us are here. But it's going to take a lot of work to get from where we are today to that. Relatedly, and I'll echo Andy here, there's a lot of pockets of innovation. What I'm listening for is who's figured out, who's cracked the code on how to scale it. Because so much of healthcare, at least, and that's sort of the lens that I come to this with, so much of healthcare is local, right? You've got, these are the dominant systems, or, oh, these are the big payers, or, this is the XYZ game in town. And that only works up to a certain geographic perimeter, right? But for these initiatives to really work, and again, for that wave a magic wand 4, 8, 10 years from now, for us to feel like we have succeeded at this, is really going to figure out, how do we get better uptake of covered services? How do we enable a shared language between healthcare, education, tech, social services? So we're all measuring and kind of caring about the same thing, but bringing to the table our respective comparative advantages. And then when I think about enabling qualities, I'll echo maybe what you've heard already, but to foot stomp a couple things. One is data, right? We collect inordinate amounts of data in healthcare, right? As regulators, right? We're up to our eyeballs in data in some ways, right? But being able to actually use it meaningfully is what needs to happen next, and do so in a way where, again, healthcare and all of our other partners represented by folks in this room can meaningfully discern that data. And then the second, and arguably the most important in my mind, is what does success look like? Surely it's a healthier country, lower obesity rates, fewer people dying of diet-related conditions, fewer kids going to sleep hungry in this country, right? There are things that feel extraordinarily important. And what I would love for us to come away out of this conversation or follow-up conversations is, what are those interim milestones that we're going to use, right? What are the interim metrics that we're going to say, okay, we're making progress towards what we see as really the true north for all of these efforts?
Well, thank you very much for all of those thoughts. So we have no magic wand, but I do want to emphasize a program that's run through our Office of Disease Prevention Health Promotion called People and Places Thriving. People and Places Thriving, which has involved many from your agencies, but then other departments from across the government, that has maybe a blueprint for that. Next, we're going to go to Rosalind So from Indian Health Service.
Thank you again. What a great question. And everything that I do at the Indian Health Service, particularly in the time that we are in right now, my goal is to make sure that when I leave the Indian Health Service, I leave it better than I found it in. And I think that everything that we do, that everything that we're talking about today, if we take that kind of a thought and think about how do we change tomorrow, to make sure that it's better across the country. So what I am specifically listening for is wanting to make sure that the voices of the more than 500 federally recognized tribes is heard every day, everywhere. And what that means is that there are resources that are flowing specifically to Indian country to address the needs that we have. And I know that the Secretary, again, has stated over and over the need for equality, equity throughout the federal government. And so how do we do that? So I'm looking for making sure that Indian Health Service is at the table. Indian Health Service's voice is always being lifted up to improve Indian country, whether it be culturally sensitive actions that are considered all the time, the community involvement, the voices of those tribal leaders that we work with every single day. And also, I think, finally, that you can learn from us. We've been talking about this for many, many years, and through the tribal communities, and how resilient we have been, how much we have taken on as tribal communities to bring up those specific communities. So that's what I'm looking for, is where do I interject myself? How do I make sure that the voices of Indian country is always being lifted up? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for highlighting the Secretary's leadership about health equity. He's always talking to us to bring a health equity lens to everything that we do, and also says don't do mild. So this is why we have such ambitious plans throughout the department. Tara, NIH.
Sure. So I'm looking for two things. So the first is I mentioned, that we had put out this RFI looking for research gaps and opportunities. But I think in hearing the conversations today, what I'm looking for are those things that are the real problems, the real challenges that need, whether it needs additional data or research, something that can help push us forward and build, again, that evidence base. So looking for those things that are really those problems that keep everyone up at night and thinking about ways that NIH can help to solve them. And then I think a couple of folks, maybe everyone actually, has mentioned, collaboration. And when I think about collaboration in a couple ways. The first is across all of NIH. We're a fairly large organization. We have 27 different institutes and centers. They are mostly, I call them disease and body part focused, right? And so as we think about how we can collaborate, how we think about collaboration across NIH, because food is medicine doesn't sort of stay confined to the guidelines of a certain disease or body part, right? And then how we can collaborate, across HHS and across the federal government to help, improve and strengthen and build upon all of the efforts that we're doing collectively.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for sharing those perspectives, but we have a full room here, and so we'd like to turn to the audience for a few questions. So if you have a question for our panelists, please raise your hand, and our colleagues circulating with the microphones will see you and come to you. Any questions? Comments? Yes, over there. It's going to take a second to come to you. Please stand up. If you would please state your name and where you're from.
Yes, I'm Richard Joyner from North Carolina, from a place that Conetoe. Most people call it Coneto, but it's Coneta. We are a local community that used to be a food desert. Now we're a food oasis. We're feeding 500 families a week. I would like to know, how do you take what you're doing and move it down to the community level and make the community sustainable in doing what you're doing?
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to take that? Or I'll assign it.
Well, maybe I'll start us
You
off,
start.
and then certainly welcome input from my colleagues as well. But, I talked about this briefly, but just to sort of mention it again, for us at CDC, 80% of what we're getting is going through CDC and then invested in states and communities. And so, I think we know that we as a federal government, we cannot do this alone, right? We are not, we don't, and we shouldn't, right? That's not the approach to this. And so I think having what we can do is help figure out what works, bring people together, ensure we have investment, ensure we have policies in place, and then work with folks in the ground, I'm sure Dr. Caleb will say it just right, but I'm not going to say it because I know I'm going to do it wrong. You warned me I'd say the name wrong. But work with folks in North Carolina, in communities across the country to say, what works here? Because it's not always going to be exactly the same. And so that's why we have programs like our REACH program that's investing in 50 community organizations and tribal organizations and says, here's what we can provide you as resources. Here's the program that we have at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now you tell us what's going to work on the ground for you and making sure that that investment is in place. But it's in place in a way that's going to work for your community and what you need, for your community and what you need, and that we're not pretending like one size is going to fit all, because we know that it won't.
Thank you so much.
I would also add that, again, using Indian Health Services example of being, there's an Indian Self-Determination Act that is in place where tribes have the authority and have the ability to take on their own programs. And about 60% of the Indian Health Service has been contracted or compacted by tribes, which means that they take that portion of the resources that the government previously had to provide that health care, and they're doing it for themselves. And what that means is decisions are made at the local level. This is we here in DC cannot make decisions for more than 500 tribes. It's irresponsible and it's wrong. So by supporting tribes that choose to be self-determined and determine again and even define what that means for them, they're thriving. They are doing. They have created and learned what they need to do to build out their healthcare system. I've seen tribes that now run their own grocery stores. I've seen tribes now really focus on what is best for their community people that's going to lift them up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've had the opportunity to visit a number of those centers. Also to point out that's where actually 1,500 of our Public Health Service Commission Corps officers work is for Indian Health Service. There's a question in the back.
Yes, my name's Leela Saldana, and this is not likely a topic to come up today, but it's the topic of dietary supplements, since I used to work in dietary supplements. We know over 50% of adults take dietary supplements to prevent disease. And so we've got two people on this panel from the NIH and from the FDA with Office of Dietary Supplements. So I'm curious as to how you see dietary supplements fitting in this whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Califf, this is yours. You can thank me later.
You know, first of all, my personal view is if you're going to ingest something for your health, there are only three possibilities. One is it improves your health. The other is it has no effect. The other is that it's harmful. And there is no magical way. There's, you know, some people think doctors learn in medical school to be able to tell this some magic way. That doesn't happen. The way to know is to do adequate and well-controlled clinical trials and get the answers. And unfortunately, we lack that in dietary supplements for the most part because there's not a requirement for pre-market data to put your supplement on the market. In fact, there's not even a requirement for listing at this point. So we need help in terms of better legislation to clarify what works and what doesn't in the dietary supplement arena. I will point to one bright light that recently happened was a large randomized trial of multivitamins that occurred. That's a pretty good randomized trial and it looks promising for improvement of or slower deterioration of cognitive functioning with aging. If we had more studies like that, this would be very clear. In the absence of that, I'm afraid it's very hard for anyone to say scientifically which supplements are good to take and which are bad to take, and it's pretty much left to advertising. I wish I had a better answer, but that's really where we currently are.
Thank you very much. I see there's another question.
Good morning. My name is Ben Money with the National Association of Community Health Centers. And Admiral Levine, this is a question for you.
Hey.
I really appreciate your leadership in the Equitable Long-Term Recovery and Resilience Plan. I think it's now called Thriving Places and People Together. I was just talking with my good friend, Reverend Joyner. He's working in an area that is rural, that's a food desert, and he's providing incredible fresh foods and resources to people in the area. And we were just, speculating on the possibility of braided funding and grant guidance that could potentially come from USDA, from HHS, from the Department of Transportation, and even Labor, Small Business Administration and Commerce, to create healthy food hubs and develop initiatives in rural places that are food deserts. And so if you could talk to us more about what that could look like in the short term and in the long term to create some multi-solver solutions utilizing funding from across the federal government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for highlighting. So, of course, you have to have an acronym for everything. So it was ELTRR, Equitable Long-Term Resilience and Recovery. But we thought that was a little bit clunky. And so it is now called People and Places Thriving. This is really a labor of love across the United States government. It lives within HHS. It used to be CDC in the previous administration. It emigrated to my office and our Office of Disease Prevention, Health Promotion. But it really involves looking at what I call the vital conditions of health, well-being, and justice, which to me is an evolution of the social determinants of health. And it would really be looking across the federal government, across those departments that you're talking about how we can create a thriving society. But braided funding across departments. There are, I know it'll shock you, but there is a certain bureaucracy associated to the federal government. And, I think that's an aspiration. Right now, we are working under the Secretary's leadership to do that at HHS. Across different departments is something to aspire to. But we do want to continue to promote this foundational approach, and I think that is something to aspire to, looking at a topic such as nutrition, food and nutrition security, and looking at food as medicine, and how can we accomplish that across different departments, not only just different divisions within HHS. I have 1 minute left. I did see someone raise their hand. Did someone... Well, they have several people who've raised their hands. We can take one more question.
I think there might be a young audience member here with a question, if I can put my finger on the scale.
And then we'll need to finish up.
I'm Jax Barry. I'm 10 years old, and I'm from Philadelphia, and I have celiac disease. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on making gluten a major allergen and making it required to be labeled on all packaged foods in the U.S.?
Thank you very much, Jax. Thank you. It was wonderful to meet you before the conference, and thank you very much for your advocacy and your courage in terms of speaking out. Commissioner Califf, the regulations are with you now. This is a surprise question, but something that I think that we'd be very pleased to talk about.
Well, we know that gluten issues are increasingly prevalent in our society and affecting a lot of people. So there's a process for changing a label. It's complicated, but it can be done, and there are people on all sides of an issue like that. So I think the advocacy community, represented by you, is making a case, and we're going to have to consider that carefully as we go forward.
Thank you, Jackson. I appreciated all the materials you gave me, and we have regular meetings between us all, and we're going to bring up that topic. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing your questions, and thank you all for sharing your perspectives and your leadership and your insights, and for joining us at today's summit. I am really inspired by all of us working together and all of the dedication and passion that we see at the panel and at HHS under the Secretary's leadership, and with all of you to support people and communities that we all serve. So I look forward to working with all of you as we collectively advance food as medicine. Thank you all. I'll turn things back to you, Rose.
Thanks again to our amazing colleagues and panelists here. I hope folks found the conversation educational and inspiring. I think we're going to pause here for a quick picture, so bear with us while we do that. It's so many leaders, so much energy here on the stage. And while we're doing that, I do want to let folks know we're going to take a quick 15-minute break. There's coffee back and the East Wing bathrooms over on this side. We'll plan to come back here at 11:05. Thanks. We're going to go ahead and get started here as people are taking their seats. I think folks here know that CMS plays an important role in helping empower state innovation through 1115 waivers. And addressing the social determinants of health related to food as medicine is really critical. So we are really excited for our next panel. I know people are also very excited to see one another. Caffeine is medicine, food is medicine. But if we could go ahead and take our seats, please. We do want to keep on track because we have a busy day. So if folks could make their way back to the seats, we're trying to get the next panel started. Again, with CMS, we've got two incredible colleagues, one of whom you heard from earlier, that really are instrumental in what we're doing at CMS now and what we can do at CMS moving forward. I'm a former camp counselor, and I'm not afraid to use my camp counselor voice, guys. So, No, I could do 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me. My kids know that one from school. Anybody? Or the clap once if you can hear me. Thank you. Thank you for humoring me. I appreciate that. We've got here on stage two incredible CMS colleagues who, again, were the true masterminds between the recent waiver opportunities and the social determinants of health work that CMS is working on. DT Malik, who we heard from earlier, the acting director of the Office of Minority Health and CMS, and Jessica Lee, the chief medical officer from the Centers for Medicaid and CHIP Services, are going to talk a little bit about new CMS guidance framing and opportunities. So over to you guys.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming and coming back. Feel free to take your time kind of settling in. The next few minutes are really intended to be a bit of a transition. So in the last session before the break, we talked a lot about what many of the agencies here at HHS are doing in the food as medicine space. We're now going to do a bit of a deeper dive into Medicaid specifically. So I'll tee this up from the purview of CMS and then hand it over to Dr. Lee to share a bit more in detail, and that'll then be the segue to the panel that follows. I think you heard me say this before, but just to reiterate again, CMS now has a number of new flexibilities related to screening, payment, and that help enable access to food as medicine services, and requirements really around intentional collaboration between the healthcare sector, public health, education, social services, and others. What I always say about these things is federal policy is step A, right? Places like CMS can certainly allow for policy flexibilities or put in place some guardrails, but the really hard work is the B through Z, is the policy implementation of what happens when there's a federal flexibility, be it through the Medicaid program or the Medicare program or a model. How exactly does that get operationalized and implemented? And I think as we've walked down this road over the last few years, we've increasingly learned the importance of partnerships across different silos, the importance of data that you heard quite a bit about in the last panel. And I think someone brought it up, one of the questions towards the tail end of the last panel, really brass tacks tactical blending and braiding of funding, right? There's very often pockets of money or pockets of investment for very specific things. And the challenge that we often hear about from our colleagues in state and local contexts is how to bring all of those things together to really create a seamless experience. So the panel that'll follow will really get into, with some incredible experts that I'm so excited for you all to be able to hear from, about their work in intentionally creating partnerships that are trust-based and really the hard work of implementation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lee to share a bit more about the specifics of that guidance in the Medicaid program.
Thank you so much. So in Medicaid and CHIP, we are really focused on helping to support states in getting people connected to care, ensuring that they have access to the needed healthcare services, and ultimately supporting improving health outcomes and health equity. We've been really excited about new flexibilities and opportunities that we've clarified to do that work through addressing health-related social needs. In the last 3 years, we've provided new flexibilities, such as through managed care and 1115 demonstrations, in addition to highlighting other opportunities that states have through other authorities. We released a framework in November of 2023 that walks through all of the different ways that states can address health-related social needs in both Medicaid and CHIP, also known as the Children's Health Insurance Program. There are a variety of Medicaid authorities that states can use to support housing and nutrition services, such as state plan amendments, 1915C waivers, and then, as mentioned, managed care flexibilities that we outlined in new guidance last year, in addition to the 1115 demonstrations. The 1115 demonstrations supporting health-related social needs have been approved in 8 states under our framework. Most recently, the New York 1115 demonstration that we announced last month. Oh, this month, still January. So earlier this month. Of note, when you walk through this framework, we identify what services are allowable under each specific authority, and perhaps most importantly, we say what each of these authorities are for those of you who are new to partnering with us here in the Medicaid and CHIP space. States who are using these 1115 demonstrations tailor their services to specific populations and, again, specific services, using evidence-based interventions to provide care for individuals based on both clinical need and social risk need. Some examples of the nutrition services covered under these 1115 demonstrations are meal delivery and pantry stocking tailored to health risk, such as delivery of medically tailored meals to pregnant individuals with gestational diabetes. Other examples of these services are nutrition education, nutrition and grocery provisions, such as fruit and vegetable prescriptions, protein boxes, food pharmacies, healthy food vouchers, and grocery provisions for high-risk individuals to avert acute healthcare needs. I really want to underscore that all of these programs should be linked and connected to existing social services so that people are being connected to programs like WIC and SNAP to ultimately create that seamless, no wrong door experience to fully support an individual's food and nutritional needs. Our services and supports are intended to supplement the existing social services, not replace them. And as part of these health-related social needs 1115 demonstrations, states must integrate Medicaid services with existing social services. And states must increase spending or maintain or increase spending. And hold on to their paper, must maintain or increase spending as a condition of these 1115s. In addition to these requirements, we have some other guardrails to safeguard the mission of the Medicaid program, including some budgetary requirements, and also a requirement that for states that adopt these 1115 demonstrations, they must maintain a certain threshold or increase payment rates for primary care, behavioral health, and OBGYN services. This really highlights that connections to care can only be successful when people have timely access to healthcare providers. So finally, as I think and hope that you've heard today, we've been partnering with other agencies across HHS, in addition to other federal agencies like USDA, trying to create the collaboration at the federal level that we're requiring at the state level and that we frankly need at both the state and the community level. As Dr. Malik was saying, the federal policy is really just step A of creating this new framework for providing care. And that step B through Z, the entire alphabet, is really at the implementation stage, figuring out how to blade and blend funding, in addition to how to say that phrase over and over again, figuring out how to braid and blend funding, and really learning from the community partners who've been working in this space for a long time about how to best make those connections to care. Ultimately, we've taken that step A, but the steps B through Z are what will make this policy impactful and sustainable in the long run. So I'm really excited to transition to our next panel, where we'll begin to talk about those steps.
Can you hear me? Oh, here we go. Thank you. Thanks, Aditi. Appreciate your time and insight this morning. We're going to transition to our next panel and to follow up on the CMS conversation, really hear from folks on the ground who are implementing food as medicine programs. Jessica will lead the conversation, and we're thrilled to welcome to the stage Shavonna Howard, Senior Advisor at USDA, Betsy Tilson, State Health Director and Chief Medical Officer from North Carolina, and Mohammed Dar, Chief Medical Officer at C3. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. So we just teed up that really you were the essential partners. So thank you for both being here and for the work that you're doing and the expertise that you're bringing with us today. We wanted to create this panel to really exemplify again those steps B through Z of the alphabet process that have to happen well in order for this policy to be impactful and successful, and are really happy that all of you could be part of this. So let's just kick right off. I'd love if you could tell me about how you're approaching implementation of this policy at the state and local level.
All right, I'll go first by virtue of geography. Well, thank you. I'm really happy and honored to be with my esteemed colleagues. And what an exciting day to think about levels of government across all layers to really think about some of these fundamental drivers of health. So it's a great joy and honor to be here. And there's so many friends in the audience, and I'm so excited to be able to do this work with. So when we have thought about, so the issue of the social drivers, especially food, and our CDC colleagues said, like, this isn't new. Like, food is important to people. But what's new is thinking about how do we scale this at a national level, a state level, a community level. So when we've thought about implementing it, we really wanted to just get, well, we use the term radical pragmatism. Like, don't try to get perfect. And don't try to continue to try to learn stuff that we knew. Let's just be radically pragmatic and start trying to implement things and to scale, because we had so many different pockets of data to show this worked, but what was missing was that scaling piece. So that's what, as a state government, where we thought our role would be is how do we scale this at a state level? And so we have kind of like a PDSA type cycle that we've said is lead, transform, finance, and learn. And then we'll continue around that circle based on that learning. And so what I mean by that, especially at the state level, is first is lead. We've acknowledged that you can't ever detract politics from policy, from implementation, from programs. They're all intervened. And so especially at a state level, thinking about how are you leading with the vision? How are you articulating the vision? How are you articulating the business case? Making sure you know who your stakeholders are, and it may be your General Assembly or your legislator or your big healthcare systems or your payers or your community or your people. But really, part of that is leading by saying, this is what we want to do, this is why it's important, leading with that vision and knowing how to speak to that to different audiences with whom you're going to need to partner. Second is transform, and what we've thought about is how do we build an infrastructure, an ecosystem across the state with enabling factors that actually allow innovation to flower more quickly if we can build that infrastructure, right? So that we're not all building the roads, the government builds the roads, and then we have people innovate on top of that. So how do we create a statewide infrastructure that will facilitate that? And for some components of that we've thought about is standardized screening, right? So let's make sure we're asking these questions. A shared data and technology platform for once you see that need that you can refer, and then you can connect social services and healthcare with the shared data platform. Who's the right workforce? Community health workers are an incredibly great workforce. So how do we build that? How do we build that workforce? And then thinking about how are we investing and organizing and supporting our communities, because this is where the work is done. So thinking about how we're transforming that connection between health and human services so that we can all innovate on top of that. Third is finance. And so although I don't think this is just a Medicaid-only issue and not a Medicare-only issue or a public insured issue. This is what we have control of, and we can be leaders. The federal government can lead, and then we can have other payers follow behind us, and often Medicare is in that place, in this space, Medicaid is in that space. So how do we think about financing? Thinking about all the flexibilities in Medicaid managed care, and then we've really pulled a lot of those leverages. And then these beautiful 1115 waivers, which I'll brag on North Carolina a bit. We were the first 1115, and we're really the most comprehensive 1115, where we're covering food, housing, transportation, interpersonal violence in our 1115. We've just put in a proposal for our next 1115 waiver. So thinking about the flex, and the beauty about the 1115 is that it can actually allow you to finance your communities and your community-based organizations with capacity building dollars up front. That is key to investment in our communities, not just with dollars, but with TA as well. So that financing is incredibly important. And then learn. One of our university evaluator partners is here in the audience. I don't know where Seth is, but thinking about how are we making the academic public health partnerships so that we are learning, not so much we're learning that food is important, but we're learning the implementation science. How do you do this? How do you do it well? What tweaks need to happen? So those are our 4 buckets: lead, transform, finance, and learn. And happy to talk more about that in detail as we go forward.
Bodar, do you want to take it away? And I can preview that, Siobhan, I'm going to ask you that based on what you're hearing, what advice you have for your other panelists.
Absolutely. So I come from Massachusetts, an organization called C3, Community Care Cooperative, piggybacking off the 1115 waiver that the state of Massachusetts received to be able to do food and other interventions. The Medicaid agency created a framework that C3 then took off with. Taking a step back, as a medical provider, imagining what the status quo is. You ask the patient in front of you, are you experiencing food insecurity? And if they say yes, in a siloed system, you hand them a sheet of paper, says here's a food bank in your area. They have probably been to it before. It's almost insulting to hear about something they already know, and they know the limits of that. And then there's a great moral injury on both sides, because neither side felt like they got what they wanted to or wanted to make the patient's experience better. At C3, with the 1115 behind us, we wanted to build those connections in the community as close as possible. So that means we partnered with 24 of our federally qualified community health centers who co-built the programs with 25 community-based organizations. They identified nearly 14,000 patients patients who could benefit from the interventions, and we had a 93% engagement rate of folks who got those interventions. What that means is you build it locally. This isn't some distant phone call calling you out of the blue saying, we're your insurance company once upon a time, are you food insecure? Most of the people in this room would probably get that call, assume spam, and hang up. And for those who are food insecure, they're used to also being in that landscape where they don't know necessarily what to trust. For us, that meant building a program that's across 7 different languages, for example, French, English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, and more. It means going across ethnicities and cultures for healthy food that sparks joy for people's local experience, and working with the community-based organizations to identify what were they already doing and what could they do if we partnered together to build something and expand resourcing out. We're really proud of the work that we did. We launched during the shutdown period of the COVID pandemic, right when folks needed us most, and looking forward to talk more.
Good morning. So I think I would say, as far as what we've learned at USDA as we've continued to roll out programs, especially for majority of my experience has actually been on the state side of operating some of these programs, most of them focusing on SNAP, is, I love the concept of the larger ecosystem, right? The collaboration of bringing everyone to the table, but it's also recognizing and meeting people where they are. So many people who want to come to the table either have never had a seat at the table before, right? So don't have the same starting point, and oftentimes maybe not even have the same opportunities or information. So how can they truly contribute and kind of share their thoughts? Additionally, not having a seat at the table also means that their voice has never been heard before, and oftentimes people are afraid to speak up. So what can we do to empower others who have never had the seat before so they can truly contribute to the goal that we're all trying to work towards? I think you both said something about this earlier, but it's also in, putting out the information to all of those that are going to be involved, really informing, educating, fact sheets. We've seen so many opportunities in USDA as we've continued to roll out new programs. Recently, we saw this as we're rolling out summer EBT, with so many states just really not understanding the path forward. So where have we done this well, right, so that we can take this to scale? And then how can we showcase this not by a federal voice, right, but by a state and a partnership voice who are really used to doing this work every day and have the experience? In all the years that I've worked in state and federal government, the one thing that I think consistently rings true, regardless of where the individual meets or comes into the door, and I really like I think Aditi said it earlier about the no wrong door approach for participants, is that so many people don't want to come to the federal government and they don't want to come to the state government. So if you truly want to understand how to influence change, how to implement, build programs that are going to work, that are going to meet the people, you have to hear the voice of the people.
Thank you so much. That is such an important moment, and also thinking about just enhancing joy in terms of supporting someone's wellness and well-being. Thinking about that empowering of the individual, empowering voices that haven't been heard before. Health equity has been a cornerstone of everything that we've done in our programming. How do you see us being able to build food as medicine interventions and systems to improve health equity?
I'll give a plug here that there's two ways you could build such systems. One is to build a large system, one size fits all, and scale it rapidly, which you do get that scale, but then you lose that personal touch along the way. For us, that meant we built heterogeneous systems, that those 24 community health centers, 25 community-based organizations, mean each of those connections decided mutually what the interventions would be for that local community. That takes time to set up, but it can be made fluid and it can be made effective. That means those organizations, when I told you 93% of those identified received outreach and received interventions, that means they're case coordinating together for that remaining 7%. They want to get to 100. They want to make sure that everyone in the community is served. And different peoples will need different interventions or different needs. So for someone that might be first leveraging to make sure that they haven't been left behind on signing up for SNAP or WIC. For another, that might be a very specialized medical condition, so they need medically tailored meals that fit their medical condition, like chronic kidney failure. For another, it might be produce prescriptions. For another, it may just be equipment. They actually have access to the food, but they can't make it the way they would like to. And everything in between, classes and resources focused at all ages. So when meeting health equity, it is meeting the community and hearing from them, putting them as part of your design process to say, this is what we need, rather than rushing in and saying, here's a quick solution.
Shivana, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah. Sure. So I really love what you said about not having the cookie cutter approach and making sure that you can individualize based on community. I mean, I can't tell you, living in Louisiana and working in the state, how many challenges we had in providing services, resources in urban versus rural communities, thinking that we can bring a solution that has worked in the urban areas but is not working in the rural communities. I think there's got to be intentional efforts that are made, not just about all the solutions, but also the geographic population in which we're serving and the needs, and understanding the different needs and how those needs kind of rise to the table and how we can respond to them. I think of just so many different times and different examples that I've met with legislators who have really been pushing on bringing additional resources and support from USDA into those rural areas, and the challenges that they've had because they can't get a grocery store, right? So how do you want me to help increase or even address food insecurity when nobody will come here to serve this community? And I think one of the things that USDA did and really can learn from that is, the pandemic brought forth an opportunity for all states to get on board to really address not only rural needs, but really to bring equitable options when it comes to food insecurity for everyone with SNAP online purchasing. It really did give those who didn't have the power before a lot more power in where they purchase, how they purchase, and the option to purchase healthy eating habits and fruits and vegetables. And so I really do think that we have to do a better job and make sure that we're understanding that we need to bring forth a lot of different examples, right? A lot of best practices that have worked in various communities to the table so that states and communities can see the different options that are available to them rather than trying to think through on their own, what can we do differently?
And I absolutely agree with everything that my co-panel said. And then I'll add to that, thinking through, I think disparities and equity is woven in to everything that we've been doing, thinking through on the design level and thinking through the interventions. And I think as an individual, folks who are food insecure are often from historically marginalized populations in which there wasn't investment in those populations. And so by meeting the needs of that individual, you can start addressing some of those disparities. And I think food is a really lovely place to start because food is one of the easiest things you can get to people. And then it can free up other resources for some of the other social needs that sometimes are harder to meet. And typically, food insecurity doesn't run by itself. It typically runs with other unmet social needs. So it will help that individual as well, but also I absolutely agree although I talked about building a statewide infrastructure, a piece of that is then being well connected with community and not having it be the same on the ground. And so I think when we think about investment in communities, and building equity in communities is really important. And our design of our 1115 is that we have 3 areas of the state in which we're doing this first phase. They're pretty much all rural areas. North Carolina is the 2nd largest rural population in the country, so 3 rural areas. We have a network lead, kind of a backbone organization that then is working with the community-based organizations in those areas that are doing these services. So building that capacity on the ground with the knowledge and the skill and the connections on the ground. I think Reverend Joyner stepped out, but he is one of my absolute heroes, and his organization, which is in a food desert in a rural area, is part of our pilots in that we are then the Medicaid dollars is going to Reverend Joyner and his collective of churches that is delivering food to his folks. So not only does that help them, deliver a better intervention because it is more culturally competent, but also you're investing financing into that organization, into the Reverend Joyners of the world, so that then he is able then to hire more people, and now we have more people employed, and then there's more economy and investment going into that community, which then helps everybody. So food is like a great canary in the coal mine, that with food, not only can we feed an individual, but we can also then invest in communities and especially in our rural communities. So I think it's just an amazingly great strategy. And again, our design has been this, not just one cookie cutter intervention across the state, but who are the experts and how do we resource our community, not just to do a good job, but also to grow the health and thrivingness of our communities.
So I've been hearing all morning just so much excitement. It's really, really energizing about the new opportunities here and about this kind of bridge that that we're crossing here. We're not just bringing people to healthcare in terms of access. We're bringing people to we're bringing care to people in terms of health and well-being. So kind of crossing a different kind of bridge and bringing that into communities. We've been working at CMS to do that in terms of healthcare access with services like school-based services and also mobile crisis. But thinking about that new bridge about health and wellness that is an opportunity here in the food as medicine space, what do you see as the greatest opportunities and the greatest barrier, because we've also heard some challenges too, when you think about integrating these nutritional services and supports, which have a long-standing history and expertise in communities, into a healthcare space and system?
So for one piece, the healthcare system, we hear about it all the time. It is burdened. There's an incredible amount of burnout. Probably in many parts of the nation, it's very hard to get an appointment these days. And what that means is for any medical or healthcare provider, time is a precious asset. So if we are building these resources as just one more thing, the provider needs to sneak in while they also need to sneak in talking about your cholesterol. And by the way, you're there because your knee hurts and they're talking about a bunch of stuff and you're like, my knee hurts. It doesn't work out well that way. What does work, though, is building a team around it. For us, that meant getting many community health workers local to the communities who are the wraparound team, so that both we are screening for the health-related social needs, we are able to refer fluidly, but still let the providers also do the other components. Coming back to that example I gave of the moral injury, when you have those interventions and those systems built up, the providers also are more excited. They want to ask the questions. They want their team members to tell them, like, we already figured this out, we're already on it, before the patient's even in the room. And the patients, the next time they come back, they feel more empowered, more energized, that they can bring up more about their experience so that those interventions can happen. That is one great tension that I think we're going to have to continue to contend with. Another is, I'm going to dare say, I think this is a pretty friendly audience in this room of folks who are bought into this concept. There are still people outside who are not necessarily convinced, and there is still a virtuousness to this work, that it's not only the right work to do, but it becomes the victorious work, because we have data on our side that these interventions improve outcomes significantly for high blood pressure, for diabetes, for total use of the medical system, which is more expensive the further along you get, whether that's an emergency room visit or a hospitalization, that this work actually in the country that spends the most on healthcare doesn't get the outcomes requisite to that you can redirect those funds in a way that repairs that moral injury, that does the right intervention for folks, that spreads that joy, and saves the healthcare dollar that right now we're spending on the wrong side. That is going to continue to be a fight about where do we put dollars and where do we put values, but it leads to a virtuous outcome.
I think that the pandemic created a lot of opportunities. And I think more states, and what we're seeing is more community one who are really leaning in and being more supportive and understanding, because the individuals who are receiving benefits today are not the same individuals who received benefits like 5 and 10 years ago. So the stigmatism that's been associated with a lot of our programs, a lot of these benefits, doesn't quite look the same. I wouldn't say it's normalized, but it's definitely recognizing that there are a lot of individuals who are on the programs who haven't been on them before. So how can we really do things differently? I think states were very courageous, community-based organizations were very courageous, not only in how they showed up to make sure that people were fed and seen during the pandemic, but also in how they respond even during, disasters, like when you're thinking of the southern states. So I think we can really build on that energy that is already existing, but also recognizing that there was a lot of great best practices and pilots that came out of the pandemic, a lot of federal funding that came out of Congress that moved into states and into local communities to do things differently that we likely would have never got funded to do before. So how do we show using the data that those innovations are actually working, and how do we replicate those so individuals can come together and really create this true no wrong door approach? I had the opportunity probably almost a year ago to visit in the state of Colorado. And I went there to visit one of our WIC clinics. And what was so amazing to me, for 20 years I've been in meetings where we talked about really providing the service that individuals need and not having them go to 20 different organizations to get support. And when we went to this clinic, it was a mom who was there, yes, for WIC, but she was there to see her doctor, and she was there to see get a whole bunch of other services. And while she was with her doctor, waiting for a doctor to come in, the nurse pushed a button because she read in the doctor's notes that the child needed more calcium, right? The child needed more dairy intake, and that she needed some resources and support, and that was probably part of the reason for why the child had to keep coming into the doctor's office. But as she pushed her button, a WIC specialist came in and did the entire interview for WIC on the spot and got her approved for benefits, had her vouchers at the door, and walked her out after her appointment to see a SNAP worker who actually determined eligibility for SNAP as well. So I think a lot of that came from grant funding that came in during the pandemic, but it shows that all these innovations can grow and lead to sustainable efforts. And so we need to continue to carry those forward as we continue to do this work. I think the challenge that we have, of course, is that systems are overburdened, states are overburdened, so how can we really help to redirect to make sure they continue to see the benefit and understand the why we are all pulled into this work?
I just want to note quickly on that we talk a lot about different ways to try to sustain and increase our workforce. And that concept of the clinic that you describe, I'm still a practicing provider. That is so exciting. The idea of being able to provide that kind of care for my patient on the spot, that is attractive to providers. That is a thing that will keep people in the healthcare field and bring new people in. So I just love that example.
I agree completely too, and I think part of the burnout is part of the moral injury, right? That you don't feel like you can actually take care of the person in front of you. So the more that we can do that and coordinate those services, that's going to help with our burnout as well. I agree certainly with everything said, and I'll add to it is the systems are overburdened, but they're also been siloed. Right, so our healthcare and social services have been siloed, and on the social service side, it's been woefully underfunded and underinvestment. So, when I think about the challenges are the opportunities. How about do that? So that again, I alluded to this a little bit, but thinking about how do we need to build the capacity, not just in terms of dollars, but also TA and connections between our two sectors so that they can work more seamlessly around that person. So I alluded to a little bit, one of the beauties of the 1115 was that not only could we use Medicaid dollars for actually food, but we could use Medicaid dollars for this capacity building up front, that we could front our community-based organizations so that they could hire people, they could understand, they could think about, I'm going to have to bill, I'm going to have to do an invoice, I'm going to have to intersect with managed care plans. So I think the opportunity, especially of 1115, of having that upfront capacity building dollars is really, really, really important, coupled with the TA to help our CBOs. And again, one of the shared infrastructures we did was not only do we have a shared platform where the care manager and the managed care organization can find someone has a need, they can make a referral, but then the community-based organization can do the invoice for that referral in the exact same platform, because most of our food pantries haven't been used to creating an invoice to a plan. So as much as we can make that as easy and give them that T as much as possible so they'll know how to then intersect with the health plans. And then again, some of this is brass tacks, also our backbone organization, as those invoices come in from our community-based organizations, they do a little QA on that, making sure that the invoice is done right before it goes to the plan. And we have like over like a 96% payment rate of invoices. Like the quality of the invoices and payment is really high, which is great. So we need to do that, but we also need to think about TA and capacity on the healthcare side. And two pieces. One is sometimes, well, often, our healthcare sector is siloed from our social services, and our healthcare sector is saying, ooh, food is important, housing important. Let me build these programs. Let me figure out how to do it. I'm going to become the housing specialist. That's probably not the best place. What the best place is make sure that healthcare knows who the expert on housing and food is, and then they're connecting in, and they're not necessarily building it own, and we're not over-medicalizing what is an incredible skill set and strength on the field. So that's one piece. And then, and this is really, really wonky, but you kind of asked for some brass tacks wonky, so I'm going really wonky on this one, is that I told you that we set up the infrastructure so that our community-based organizations could submit invoices to our Medicaid managed care plans. Our Medicaid managed care plans hadn't really received them before and didn't quite know how to pay. So then they were just paying kind of one lump sum, a monthly lump sum to the community-based organizations for the invoices they received. Our community-based organizations like, well, that doesn't help me. I can't reconcile my books. I need to know, was this food for Jessica? Was this? And so our managed care plans had to figure out, how do I do an itemized payment and do a whole new way so that when they were submitting that payment to the food pantry, they actually could itemize it. So it's learning on both sides to figure out how do we do this. But it's a great opportunity, and this is part of that implementation science, is how do we make these systems connect seamlessly.
And these are the details and the experiences that we need. We need to hear about people who have been working in this space. We need to hear about how you worked out the invoicing, about the managed care systems, in order to share that, in order to scale it, in order to not reinvent the wheel with new people entering this space. So we've talked a lot about Medicaid and CHIP, which, I love, but we talked a lot about the different funding that's available through Medicaid and CHIP. Thinking in the broader healthcare space, what opportunities do you see to engage with other partners in healthcare, other healthcare payers in this landscape to broaden the accessibility of food and medicine interventions?
So on the insurance payer side, we are both appreciative and incredibly excited for the new Medicare functions that are coming online. It is on us to continue to show that those have a change in outcomes, that they benefit the utilization of medical dollars downstream, in hopes that we give you the momentum to be able to give even more as time goes on. We've been partnering with health insurers in our state, such as Blue Cross Blue Shield, to do work on equity interventions and continuing to have those conversations insurer by insurer. Our challenge is similar to the wonky healthcare space when it comes to quality measurement, that we don't want to put on the provider systems or the community-based organizations 10 sets of requirements based on 10 areas of where money is coming in. So what can we do to align when it comes to screening for social determinants of health or health-related social needs screening, that is flexible or forthcoming enough that it is aligned, that it's not being done in 10 different piecemeal silos, or suddenly what was supposed to be a 10-question questionnaire becomes a 50-question questionnaire. So that is definitely a challenge of alignment ahead of us. Another is a piece that I would love to see in every state is alignment of the routes to SNAP and WIC and to Medicaid. In Massachusetts, that's becoming a common form, because as those logistics, those barriers, whether you're a patient who is struggling with the time and day to go from work to filling out these forms, or literacy, or English as a second language, or any such barrier, the more we can reduce those, the more the interventions get to folks, which again leads to the virtuous outcome. So there is need for alignment to simplify the work that can happen locally, as well as us continuing to give the momentum so that we can come back a year or two and hopefully be doing even more.
I love that concept of the alignment for a better participant experience. I mean, I think for at least the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of states kind of challenging and still making individuals go to various different avenues. And oftentimes that means that they don't go to two places because they only have 30 minutes on their lunch break and they have to just pick the one thing that's the priority. I do think there's been some intentional efforts, I think, moving forward on states who are really trying to align systems and processes for the user to have a better experience. I also think one of the challenges is, I mean, we can align the system, but if we don't share the information and make sure that we bring awareness to all of the resources and programs within the community, how can the local community partners and advocates have all the information needed in order to better provide the most viable resources and support to individuals? So I do think we have to do a better job on, really thinking through, like, which states are doing great work on when it comes to SNAP? Who has the 1115 waivers? How do those waivers intersect with SNAP and with WIC and other benefits and other programs so that they're building on each other and really having the long-term effect that we're all hoping to have?
And this is where I started in the first comment. I talked about transforming and building these shared infrastructures that could be used across payers and across populations, because food insecurity is not just a Medicaid problem, and it's not just a Medicare problem. And I think Dr. Lumpkin, who's from Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina, he's a panelist this afternoon. We've done a lot of work with Blue Cross Blue Shield in North Carolina. Oh, there he is. 30% of their population they found to be food insecure as well. So we shouldn't silo this in just as Medicaid. And along with that, sometimes we talked a little bit, there's some stigmatization to that, but this is really a population-wide thing. So we got to think about scaling and doing an infrastructure that can be utilized by all payers and all populations. And then we have a lot of health systems in our own at-risk contracts, and so they're also part of the healthcare system. So we need to scale that and make it so that all the payers can participate in some of our shared tools. And just a couple examples. So we've created a standardized set of a screening question, and it's only 10 questions. Because when providers are not going to use it, and there's a lot of different screening tools out there, lots of pages, lots of ways you score it. For a provider to use it, it's 10 questions and it's yes, no, and you can visually see it and it's easy. And it's not perfect, but it gets us a lot there. So thinking about how we're scaling that. And then, as much as you can try to standardize people asking questions, people are still going to use, some people are going to use the Prepare, some are going to use the ones in Epic, blah, blah, blah. So the other thing we're trying to do is on the back end is with data, is how do we map them? This is really wonky too, but how do we map them using LINK into what are those data codes? So even if you're not asking the exact same question, we can think on the back end how we can integrate that. So this is like, this person's food insecure, this person's housing insecure. And so the Gravity Project's doing a lot of that. We're doing a lot of work with our health systems in ingesting their screening with these LINK codes to make that data standardization. So we have that, and that's across payer. That's everybody. So thinking through that, again, we have the shared technology that's for all payers, all populations. And then we're working with our other payers as well, thinking through, okay, so if I'm paying the CBO, we have a fee schedule of these different services. I'm paying these CBO for these services. If I can get the other payers to also be paying for those same services, and then the CBO is getting payers from Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross, it makes them more more financially viable as well. And so we're doing a lot of that work, as well as aligning some of the tools, the infrastructure, and then some of the payments and services to make it more so that we're not fragmenting at the CBO level. Oh, I won't. One payer will only pay for this, but we'll pay for, so that just doesn't work. It doesn't work at the CBO level. So how do you align what you're actually paying for?
That's such an important point in terms of thinking about alignment across different sectors, reducing burden, not only for on the states from our perspective, but also for all of the community providers and healthcare providers involved. So recognizing that I think we're in the last minutes before people get their own nutritional supports, any last thoughts to leave people with?
I think the largest lesson that I've learned over the last at least 5 years is, and I learned this while I was in Louisiana, is, always take advantage of any opportunity of that a disaster has happened. So in our state, we've learned, we've grown, and we've always done things differently as a result of the experience of what we just had. And so I really hope that from what you've heard here, what you'll hear here today, that you'll be able to incorporate a lot of that into the work that you're currently doing, and that we'll lean forward and do something different so that in 5 or 10 years, we won't be having these same conversations, but maybe a next steps conversations of how can we do better versus how can we get started.
I'll offer that across all of these interventions, across all of these needs, remember to bring joy to the work, bring joy to the intervention, because that is what creates that virtuous cycle that makes folks want to engage, that makes them feel heard, and helps you build something within the community. I am only a small part about that in my organization, C3. I stand on the shoulders of giants. Kim Prendergast, who's here on our team, built with her team so much of this. Kim is here all day if you want to hear about how to reach 14,000 people across 25 organizations and get a 93% engagement rate. Please go talk to her. That's what makes this work so worthwhile.
And I would just lead with, don't be afraid just to try. You don't have to have all the answers. We're learning. Perfection is the enemy of progress. I think you do the best you can. You get input from the experts. You do the best you can up front, but then you have that humility to know it's not going to be right up front, right? It's not going to be all right. That's okay. And then keep making sure you're getting the input and that humility and then that continuous learning and that continuous quality improvement as we move forward. So don't be afraid to start if you don't think you have all the answers, because heavens knows we did not have all the answers when we were charting uncharted course and we were kind of making things up as we went. But that's okay, because we knew we were grounded in the right principles, and then we were invested in that kind of agile design and that continuous quality improvement.
And with that, I'll say just thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your experience, your vision. This is really what we're hoping for when we think about partnership and collaboration in making this work. Thank you.
Thanks again to our panelists. We have lunch served on both sides here in the Great Hall and then back in the East Wing. And then again, for those of you like myself who consider coffee as medicine, that will be arriving an extra shipment at 2 o'clock. So we'll be back here at like 12:25. And I do just want to extend a special thank you to Instacart for your support and sponsorship today. So thanks, everyone.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.